Guest characters, if done right, can act as a window into their respective universes, making players more interested in that world. If done wrong though, it can come off as blatant, cynical advertisement. Fighting games get the best of both worlds because unlike a game like Fortnite, they have to be more than just a skin with some emotes. And unlike a single-player game, they're allowed to have a non-canon inclusion in the story. There's a sweet central middle ground on how fighters take this approach. People can be of two minds with guests and fighters. I feel the majority welcomes it since the excitement for crossovers, no matter how random, is always exciting, which in turn can lead to new fans of the series for both the guest character series and the fighters appearing in. The majority typically consists of casual fans. On the flip side, some people feel that they shouldn't be included at all to keep that fighter pure, so to speak. Or that a guest would take up a slot reserved for a returning fan favorite, or even a new original character. I'm of the opinion that guests are a net positive for pretty much any fighter, barring some exceptions.
The special moves, of course, they are strong, like me.
I do often see people claiming certain characters in crossover games are guests, like the car in Fighters Mega Mix, but those are crossovers with a cast where everyone is from another property, so I wouldn't say those games count. Proper guest characters still happen in crossovers, but I'll go over those examples later. If you want to see what I think are the 10 best guests in the history of fighters, check out this video I did for EVO a while back. But in this video, we're gonna go over as many guests as I could possibly find, so way more than 10, covering the good, the bad, and the Ronaldo.
They are strong, like me.
Looking at some of the earlier guest characters, we have to stretch the definition of that word a little. Karnov from Fighters History is the oldest I can find, and it's questionable if he even counts. Being the first game in a series, Karnov acts as the final boss. Karnov's Revenge is the second game in the Fighters History series, and they decided to title it to make the guest get top billing and act as the final boss. That's like the third Soul Calibur being called Yoshimitsu's Vengeance or something. Karnov I'd be hard-pressed to call a true guest character. Other than him, there was another Data East character called Chelnov who was in Fighters History Dynamite's SNES port. Chelnov is the main dude from Data East Atomic Load Runner. Karnov and Chelnov both act as mascots for Data East, and that same company made the Fighters History series, so this is more of an intercompany guest, which I personally don't count for the most part. Though that's not to say it's still not cool when that happens. For example, Ryo from Art of Fighting appearing in Fatal Fury Special is the first time two different fighting games from SNK crossed over. Now there's a whole series of nothing but that. Ryo even appeared at Bariki 1 much later. Capcom has done it too, with Akira from Rival Schools appearing in Street Fighter V. This appearance finally canonized Rival Schools in the Street Fighter universe. Even when Sakura appeared in Rival Schools herself back in the day, Capcom was being cagey if this was the same universe or not back then. Capcom has even done this with series that have nothing to do with each other. For example, take Onimusha Blade Warriors, a platform fighter that takes place in feudal Japan, where characters fight demons using magic in a very serious and violent setting, in which Mega Man and Zero decide to show up.
Mega Man! Jack into the world of Onimusha!
Lan, stick to the operation.
Leave it to me!
The Marvel equivalent is having Spider-Man and X-Men Mutant Academy too. These guys cross over all the time, but it's more special here since people were only expecting X-Men in the cast. Seeing Spider-Man was made all the more surprising because of it.
Perhaps you should find your happy place and stay there.
Sometimes just the character themselves, you'd be scratching your head on how they work, like the Chocobo in Tobal 2. This is literally just a tall bird, and now you're telling me he's gonna throw hands, beaks? Or Akira Toriyama stand in OC being a secret fighter? Now, that's how you do an intercompany crossover. Get into the series owned by the same company that you wouldn't expect to cross over. For Onimusha Blade Warriors, I'd expect like Jill from Resident Evil to show up before Mega Man. It's much cooler when a curveball is thrown like that. A true guest character for me is when someone from one company is included in a separate company's game. Like hands had to have been shaked and contracts signed for their inclusion. The earliest example is Akuma's appearance in X-Men Children of the Atom in 1994. Now, Akuma is a Capcom character in a Capcom-made game, but the IP of the game is something that company doesn't own. Akuma's using his Street Fighter II Turbo sprite, and it doesn't stand out as badly as I thought. He is noticeably shorter, but since it's such a fast-paced game, this doesn't really bother me too much. He can do things like shoot 2 fireballs in the air as well as implement a counter move. Surprisingly, the playable Akuma can't do the Raging Demon yet in this game. Actually encountering him is a fun challenge if you meet the conditions to fight him. This marks the first time Marvel crossed over with Capcom. Capcom didn't just sneak him in without telling anyone, which was the style at the time. Akuma's inclusion was actually approved by Marvel themselves. If only they knew what would grow from there. The second Capcom guest in a Marvel game is a weirder one. Anita from Darkstalkers and Marvel Superheroes. Her sprite actually doesn't stand out as much as Akuma's, but why her? She's not even playable in her own game, she just follows Donovan around. Having limited sprites to work with, they mostly have other effects act as their moves, like using Akuma for her DP motion or Lele for her short-range projectile. For her hyper combo, she hilariously uses an icon of her face, which by the way is the most broken move in the game that just goes on forever. You take more damage blocking the move, so it's actually better to take the hit. One way or another, you're not walking away from love for you unscathed. Akuma wasn't done touring other fighters though. In an intercompany crossover with Cyberbots, Akuma appears as a giant mecha. His sprite looks like a 3D model compared to everyone else's, but it still works here. He was only included in the home versions of Cyberbots that released on the PS1 and Saturn. Giant or not, Akuma as a robot is awesome. Using rockets on his back to propel him is an inspired idea. Let's go on over to what the US was doing.
Ready to crumble! Earthworm Jim! Take this!
Lot of gross bastards. Earthworm Jim in Battle Arena Toshinden has gotta be one of the most out-of-pocket picks ever. The company that owns Jim, Interplay, had an agreement with Takara, which published Earthworm Jim games in Japan. Takara ported Toshinden to PC, and I guess they figured, fuck it, throw Jim in. Believe it or not, I wouldn't count this as a guest character, but a guest costume, which can be a video on its own. He's just a reskin of an existing character, Rungo Iron. We have the aesthetics of Earthworm Jim, but not a single move to call his own. Clay Fighter 63.5 was fully developed by Interplay, so they just grabbed Earthworm Jim again and put him in with the roster of other freaks. This time, he's joined by another Interplay character, Boogerman from the platformer Boogerman. At least these guys fit right in with the theme of the roster. Back to Battle Arena Toshinden, the main dude Eiji Shinjo from that series appeared in a not-so-great fighter called DXerd, or Dizerd. Both this and Toshinden were made by Takara, so another intercompany crossover. This might have been the last time Eiji even appeared in a fighter since he was absent from Toshinden 4 and the Wii reboot. Eiji not being that iconic just slots in with the rest of the Xrd cast, making him not stand out at all, and most people probably wouldn't know he's a guest. I would bet anyone who picked this game up had no idea he wasn't from this universe. Sometimes a character can fit in too well or just isn't well known in a series that isn't well known, making them just another face to pass over in the character select. A problem, mind you, that won't just be with this game. For a much weirder inclusion, let's head on down to Capcom Town for the release of Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. In the Japanese version only, they included a popular comedian named Noromaru. He fulfills two archetypes, being both a guest and a joke character, and he's certainly not the most viable character in the game. He was planned to be in the Western release, with code for his moves translated into English left in the Western version's ROM file. He even had a cut move where he fantasized about a different Capcom girl and got a nosebleed that would hit the opponent, one of his fantasies being questionable. A more interesting cut move is one where he sticks his fingers up a character's ass, giving them 1,000 years of pain. I assume Marvel wasn't cool with this dude sticking his fingers up Spider-Man's ass, which is a shame. I'm split on his inclusion, since why didn't they make a new sprite for a Marvel character instead? Personally, I don't think this dude took up a slot, but rather was just a bonus. This Noromaru himself is a comedic persona for the real-life comedian. It was a character Noromaru frequently played, and the love poured into his sprite is insane. Also, this is notable because it's rare to have a guest character in a crossover game, probably because it comes off as a little tacky. Like, damn, was Marvel not good enough for you, Capcom? A crossover is essentially half guest characters, so why include a third wheel to that equation? Years later, Capcom did this again with Street Fighter Cross Tekken. The PS3 had 5 exclusive characters, which is wild it was that many, 3 of which were guest characters Sony owned, Cole McGrath from Infamous, and a pair of cats named Toro and Kuro. These three were neither a Tekken nor a Street Fighter character. With the cats in particular, according to Ono, someone at Sony called him upset that the cats are wearing PlayStation branded headbands and was mad that Capcom didn't ask for approval. Ono had to remind the rep that these cats were owned by Sony. Can't blame him though, I've never heard of these guys either until this game. Tor in particular acted as the mascot for the PlayStation, but only in Japan. He's appeared in games before this, but those were again mostly for Japan. Him and his partner Kuro act as joke character versions of Ryu and Kazuya respectively. Their short height doesn't give as much of an advantage as you'd expect, especially with how fast their health depletes. Whenever you pick them, their theme song overrides whatever stage theme was gonna play instead. If you main them, then be prepared to hear that song forever. From the Sony series Infamous is Cole McGrath acting as the premier guest. Both Infamous titles were popular PS3 exclusives at the time, and I'm glad it was him instead of Kratos since that guy gets enough of these. Apparently, according to Ono, they were also thinking of putting in Nathan Drake. I wish they had included him too, since it would have made the character select symmetrical. Cole himself comes from a great series, but his character design was a common one at the time. Just an angry dude with a shaved head, which doesn't stand out much among a roster of Tekken and Street Fighter characters who are way more colorful and interesting by comparison. It doesn't help that he doesn't play all that fun either. His moves just don't have a feeling of impact to him. Maybe it's because in the game he really cuts loose there, but his appearance here, it feels like he's on a leash. None of these guests get a story mode unfortunately, but it's still cool that they all have unique win quotes with the entire cast of the game. Two other characters that were additional intercompany guests were Pac-Man and Mega Man. These were Sony exclusive too, which is odd since they were added as free DLC post-launch and they're not Sony-owned characters. I guess Capcom just cut them from the roster on Xbox since they were on the disc for that version. Pac-Man is interesting since it's him riding a Mokujin robot. What's not interesting is how he plays. There was so much that could have been done, and his moveset just comes off as not very Pac-Man or Mokujin. With having a Mokujin mecha, I thought all of his moves were gonna be animations of other characters, but they just seem kinda generic. Why does he have a flip move? Is this a reference to Law but done badly? He can shoot out a Pac-Man dot, which is the closest reference to his game he has. Some moves give out a little Pac-Man jingle, but that's it.
How about you?
Why does he have this overly long laser crotch blast? Bad box art Mega Man is much more fun to play. His moves actually reference the games, like his uppercut from the Power Fighters and different Robot Master shots in the grab from the first game. This Mega Man is inspired by the bad box art of Mega Man on the US release, although looks like he put on a few pounds since then. He's essentially a joke character, like if Dan were to become Mega Man. Despite him being fun, Mega Man fans were pissed at this guy's inclusion. Mega Man games were getting cancelled left and right at this time, and Capcom seemed to refuse to even acknowledge him, and he wasn't even in the roster for Marvel vs. Capcom. So when this washed up Mega Man showed up, it came off as disrespectful to the series. You don't make a character like this to shit on a series that same company owns. This just happened to be really bad timing. I hope people are able to look at this inclusion a bit more positively, especially since we're over a decade removed from that. I assume Sony approached Capcom to do exclusive content for them, since this seems odd that these guys were never in Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter has never had a true guest character in the series until 6. Terry and Mai from SNK's Fatal Fury were added as DLC in the second season of the game. They fit right in, and it's awesome seeing them have these expensive looking Capcom 3D models and animations. They even had story mode content with arcade mode endings, and in the single player World Tour mode, you can take them on as masters. You can tell the Street Fighter devs love Fatal Fury, with sly references to past mechanics, and the inclusion of other Fatal Fury characters and even moves. If I were to be a little bit negative, I don't think that these two will have casual players swarming to buy Street Fighter 6, since most people would think Terry and Mai are Street Fighter characters already. The directors of Street Fighter 6 even said they're open to more guests from fighters, using Sub-Zero as an example. I'd love for a fighter to have a character from each major fighting game included as a guest in their roster. If Street Fighter wants to have a MK character, or Tekken, Virtua Fighter, DOA, or whatever, I'm all for that. It's surprising Capcom fighters as a whole don't do guests that often, and it shows with some of these random ass picks. I know people wanted Street Fighter to remain pure, and I would have been right there with them if the first guests were out-of-pocket picks like another random Japanese comedian or some character from a manga. I hope Street Fighter keeps it within the realm of fighters.
Get ready. Hey, come on!
Terry also got to guest in EX Layer. He's much more straightforward here though, and it's cool he does have a stage, but he's pretty much no frills. Still awesome to see Skullomania square up with Terry though, since him and the EX Layer cast have been doing it with Street Fighters for so long. Another series that held up as long as it could was Guilty Gear. I would have guessed their first guest would have been from BlazBlue, but nope, it's Lucy from the Cyberpunk 2047 anime. Now, I know I just said I'd be pissed if Street Fighter had a random anime character, but Guilty Gear is already super anime coded. Lucy's is based on a game she doesn't even appear in, and in the show, she doesn't display a lot of fighting techniques to pull moves from. I guess she has these laser strings. As of the time of me writing this, a gameplay trailer for her isn't out yet, so I'm curious to see how they pull her off. I do get excited when the guest is someone I'm clueless on how they could play. That can lead to disappointment though, like with Freddy Krueger in Mortal Kombat 9. Now, hear me out. I'm not saying the character wasn't a cool idea. I just don't think they went all the way with his playstyle, especially for someone who kills people in their dreams in extremely creative ways. His moveset in MK just isn't that impressive. He can teleport and summon claws, but I've seen him do way more interesting things in his films. Also, he doesn't talk at all, which is something he does a lot after the first film. It looks like they gave Freddy 2 claws instead of him always having one in his films. I wonder if this was done to make his moveset more exciting, or perhaps it's easier not to deal with his special moves only being for one hand in a 2D fighter, since switching gloves on each side would be tricky. Before Freddy was DLC though, Kratos from the God of War series was included in the base roster of the PS3 and Vita versions of MK9. They even had an awesome cinematic reveal trailer for him. This was the first guest character for the Mortal Kombat series, so this was a big deal. Kratos' moveset mostly came from God of War 3, which was the series' most recent entry at this time. He was fun to use and his playstyle suited him well. He did feel a little slower than I'd expect, but his moves packed a punch. He was also the only NRS guest to have a guest stage, something I wish was the standard for all guest characters. This stage was also from God of War 3 and, spoilers, where the final battle with Zeus takes place. They even had 3 different stage fatalities you pick via a QuickTime event. Kratos did get some special treatment on how he reacted during fatalities. He would look cooler than most characters by not being afraid or not having his body inflate, etc. I'm sure this was a mandate from Sony and might be a hint as to why future NRS guests have never been from video games ever again. People throw out ideas for guests all the time for Mortal Kombat, but if we take a character like Doom Guy, would Bethesda be cool with him getting fatality'd? Characters don't look cool during fatalities. A company has to okay their character getting humiliated in the MK series. Some folks complained about NRS having a guest character opposed to a returning one. Ed Boon brought this up and claimed Freddy was the best-selling DLC by far, even more than the returning fan favorites. The following games having more guests with each entry speaks for itself really. Freddy was the canary in the coal mine, since in MKX, all 4 guests were from horror films who all coincidentally didn't talk. I'm sure that made the unique intros much easier to do because of that. Jason and the Predator were in the first DLC pack, and these guys were fantastic guests. The variation system allowed characters to play totally different depending on the style you chose. With Jason, he had ones with and without his machete. Jason's machete is iconic, but he also uses his bare hands all the time. Predator was great too, and a character long overdue for a fighter. He could be masked or unmasked, and one variant even allowed for his gun to be used more or even traps. They didn't get the exact sound effects for him, but NRS made their own version of them, and I don't think most people noticed. The last batch of DLC, NRS just released them all at once, the guests being Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Alien from Alien. Both also played great and represented their films perfectly. I wasn't even excited for Leatherface, but after playing him, I was surprised at how much he was able to do with just being a dude with a chainsaw. Alien was unique in that he was a xenomorph born from a Tarkatan, specifically Baraka. The regular Alien is super tall and has a longer head than this one. This was probably done to have a model that was easier to work with. Baraka was absent from MKX, so this was a nice consolation to at least get his playstyle. His teeth match that of a Tarkatan too, and he seems a bit more swole. I love this design and wish there was a figure of this version. I will say for the most part, the guest fatalities were not all that great compared to the ones for the MK characters. They mostly reference the films they came from, and the alien summoning the queen was the only standout among them for me. MK11 stayed in the movie lane for the most part, now with a focus on guests from films from the 80s and less on horror. The first season of DLC began with Terminator with his appearance from Dark Fate, which was the third or fourth attempt at doing a Terminator 3. He did have alternates that make him look younger if you didn't like the old version. I personally think this is one of the worst guests NRS has done. Terminator 2 is one of my favorite films of all time, and I was so pumped for this guest character above anyone else. Sadly, he just had a boring playstyle. Maybe since it was MK11, most of his kit is separated in variants that you have to make yourself. But even the one move I thought was cool wasn't actually fun to use, being when his skin falls off and he's just the endoskeleton. He couldn't even jump or do any unique moves. People complain about his stiff animations from his normals, but I feel that works since he's a robot anyways. It was cool that NRS got the rights to use Arnold Schwarzenegger's face, but they didn't get him to do the voice.
I don't suppose you hire out.
I'm a Terminator, not a mercenary.
It's unfortunately very evident and makes the voice come off as a parody of the character. I will say though, one of his fatalities is among the best in the series history. So at least he's got that. The Joker was a surprising inclusion since I didn't think DC Comics would be cool with their characters getting mutilated in MK, especially since there were so many restrictions in MK versus DC. Perhaps that's only partially true though. DC perhaps could be cool with villains like the Joker getting the MK welcome, but not their premier heroes like Batman and Superman. Regardless, Joker plays completely differently than he does in Injustice, and he fits right in. When he was revealed in a CG trailer, people complained about his face, but I don't really see the issue. Joker is a weird looking dude in all kinds of media, so yeah, the face is gonna be weird. Doesn't really matter since they changed it anyways. Another comic character, Spawn is someone that people kept asking for years. Fans were stoked when he was finally announced. He was blessed with the golden voice of Keith David, who previously played him in the animated series.
You've been to other dimensions.
Each has had its own injustices.
Maybe that's why my soul still burns.
It was great to see this Hellspawn finally square up to MK's famous Hellspawn. People complained he wasn't exciting or fun to play as, but I'm gonna disagree on that a little. Compared to Terminator, he's leagues more interesting. I can see the issue of his cape not being implemented enough, and his animations seem limited though. I don't read Spawn comics, so I don't know what else fans were wanting. Perhaps it's just because MK11 as a whole plays slower compared to MKX, and fans would have preferred he was in that instead. Also, Spawn fans, can you tell me why he has one big foot and one little foot? I thought these two comic character inclusions were a sign that NRS was not just gonna pull from movies, but the next two guests proved me wrong. RoboCop was next, and when NRS puts in someone with a gun, people panic. For a good reason too, since NRS has some of the most notorious zoners in the genre. RoboCop is yet another one. I actually did like playing as him, but playing against him is another story. I do like that they gave him a unique skeleton when fatality though, that's a cool detail. Peter Weller's likeness and voice was provided too, which has me curious if he's cool with him getting mutilated in the game. I'd love to be in a video game, but for Mortal Kombat, I don't think I'd be comfortable with that personally. Maybe once I see the check though, I'd change my tune. It's easy to forget Rambo was in the roster, maybe since he was in the last wave of DLC and was overshadowed by Rain and Melina. Thankfully, he wasn't another NRS gun zoner, and ironically his one gun move is actually terrible, and he mostly uses his traps and his knife. It was a surprise they actually got Stallone to do the voice.
You get what I'm gonna do to you?
Even for me, it's over the top.
For what you did, it's justice.
I'm sure Rambo's inclusion was to promote the movie Rambo Last Blood, but unlike Terminator, he doesn't have to look the same. Instead, we had young Rambo in his prime. This set of guests is good, but not as solid as MKX, both in terms of who they are and also in terms of how they play. MK1 is unfortunately yet another step down. Trying to beat the "Your Dad Smash Bros" allegations, NRS now instead had newer characters from comic book TV shows such as DC's Peacemaker, Omni-Man from Invincible, and Homelander from The Boys. All great shows, but these are IPs that are popular now. These guests I don't think are gonna stand the test of time compared to any of the previous ones. People bitch about the characters from the old movies, but those picks were iconic ones that have stood the test of time. All three of these more modern superhero guests had the fans concerned. Was Peacemaker gonna be another NRS Gunzoner? Yes. Were Omni-Man and Homelander just two glorified Superman movesets? Also yes. It's impressive they got all the original voices, and their appearances translate well to MK1. Even though Homelander isn't voiced by Anthony Starr, I was certainly fooled for a while since the voice actor sounds dead on.
You got spunk for an old man. I don't like that.
Well, you're a cocky prick and I loathe you.
For me, I just don't think these characters were as interesting as the previous ones. I don't know, it just comes off as an ad for these shows. It's also a bummer that they don't have true alternate costumes for these guests. MK11 was the first to give the guests multiple alternates, but MK1 goes backwards a bit here. Well, it's not like you could pick those alternates in the character select anyways. The next season offered more variety and went back to movies with Ghostface from Scream, Conan the Barbarian, and T-1000 from Terminator 2. We'll get back to him.
I wouldn't worry about him.
Ghostface is a return to having horror film picks, and I think what they did with him is clever. He's just a dude with a knife, so he definitely get his ass kicked by the entire cast in their sleep. Ghostface usually has accomplices, so he recruits Kira and Cobra from MK Deception. It's creative to repurpose two lesser-known MK characters to be part of his moveset. They don't tell you blatantly in-game either, you just have to look at the clues being their unique special movesets. The main Ghostface is based on one of the revealed killers in the first film, but you wouldn't see that unless you do a fatality on him. His colors and gear essentially act as alternate costumes too, since I assume they didn't want an orange Ghostface to take away from his spooky factor. He honestly might be one of the best NRS guests in a long time. Conan the Barbarian is technically from a comic book series that started in 1932, but this version is clearly based on the film with Schwarzenegger. The actor voicing him did a way better job with him here though. If I didn't know beforehand, I would have thought this was Arnold.
Peace will come when I crush my enemies.
Right there with you, Muscles.
His playstyle isn't that exciting to me though. Perhaps if I watched his source material, I would have appreciated what they did with him more. But on the flip side though, with Ghostface, I've never seen a single Scream movie, and I still loved what they did with him. Conan to me just seems like less fun Tusk.
You feel no fear? No pain? What's the point of this?
To kill you.
The T-1000 though just seems like an odd choice. I'm cool with guests not always being the main guy or the face of the franchise, but this just seems kinda random. These three guests are not really promoting new movies. I think NRS chose them because they actually had ideas for them that they were excited about. The T-1000 is a character in one Terminator film who is super iconic, but just seems like an odd choice. The dude also doesn't have, like, organs and blood. He's just straight up liquid metal. How are fatalities gonna work on him? Is he just gonna pretend to be dead and have a skeleton? Yes, he is. Some fatalities are legit ways he would die, but him getting his limbs ripped off and acting like it matters will always be funny.
I don't have a soul to steal.
Nowadays, Mortal Kombat characters themselves very rarely appear in anything outside their own series, especially not other fighting games made by other companies.
Finish him!
Scorpion, Raiden, and Sub-Zero were playable in both Injustice games, which was also made by NRS. I think their appearance here shows MK characters could work in a game without gore, since they fight brutally enough. These characters are cool and fun to play, blood or not. Scorpion and Sub-Zero's DC redesigns by Jim Lee are sick. Sub-Zero needs to lose that cape though. Raiden is like almost cool. I just don't like his eye mask and pecs popping out. Scorpion in Injustice 1 was a terror to the competitive scene when he first dropped. Having a teleport that hits from behind in a game where you hold back to block is a pain in the ass to deal with. After he got nerfed to Oblivion, he became one of the worst characters in the game. Raiden in Injustice 2 being a second Mortal Kombat character, people were annoyed he was taking up a DC character slot. However, he did have an alternate that allowed him to be the character Black Lightning. This costume had a completely different voice actor too. He still played like Raiden though, so it was a good compromise. Sub-Zero's Ice Blast is the first time I've seen it not freeze someone. He's literally just throwing ice at them. You have to meter burn the move for it to actually freeze. I assume, like for Scorpion in Injustice 1, this was a balancing choice. Sub-Zero does have a sneaky fatality where he rips off the cameraman's head, it being done in the perspective of the cameraman, which just seems a bit rude. NRS having a game without fatalities made it easier to get guests they wouldn't get in Mortal Kombat. Injustice 2 also included Hellboy and the Ninja Turtles as guests, both which come from comic book properties not owned by DC. Having other comic characters like this is a great theme. I'm surprised Spawn didn't appear here instead though. I think NRS would have cut loose a bit more of the moveset for him here. I probably would have griped less about the superhero guests in MK1 if they were in an Injustice game instead, just for the interactions between Omni-Man and Superman alone. The Ninja Turtles were all playable separately and even had unique intro interactions for each one. You had to create a loadout for each first though, which is a pain because you need to unlock the 4th character customization slot. They all play very uniquely too, the work that went into them is wild. With the DLC guests, you can tell that the intro interactions are frequently recycled lines among the base roster. The DLC might not have been planned out that early, which is understandable.
Can you take the cold?
I'm Batman.
You're a slippery one.
I'm Batman.
You are worthy of the Shaolin.
I'm Batman.
You're better than I predicted.
I'm Batman.
I hope Injustice 3 has some good guests whenever that's a thing. NRS could put in someone like Ryu, since there's no way in hell he could ever be in Mortal Kombat. SNK, who is known for crossing over their own characters all the time, rarely includes guests from outside IPs. The first I found is Makoto Mizuguchi from Fighters History in the Japan-only King of Fighters Maximum Impact Regulation A for the PS2. Allegedly, the producer Falcon was a big fan of the Data East fighter, and it's cool that Makoto was able to get a 3D model for the first and last time. Fighters History had long been dormant, so I can't imagine it was too expensive to use this character. The 3D KOFs have a lot of out-of-pocket picks, like Fio from Metal Slug or Hanzo from Sam Show. Those guys stood out to me more than Makoto. SNK also worked with ADK very closely all the time, and sometimes their characters would appear in each other's games. It happened so much that people forget they were separate companies. An early example of this is Fuma Kotaru from World Heroes appearing in the Aggressors of Dark Combat. He has a fresh new sprite and everything. And apparently he's pretty fast, making him one of the better characters in the whole game. A couple of console generations later saw the release of King of Fighters 14. This initially didn't have guest characters, but with Mui Mui, Love Heart, and Alice Nakata in particular, these three came from SNK-made patchy slot machines, and now SNK doesn't even have the rights to these characters anymore. Perhaps we can consider these guys retroactive guest characters because of this. The next fighter SNK did after this was SNK Heroines for the PS4 and Switch. Being a goofy spin-off, it didn't cross my mind SNK would have guests, let alone DLC at all, but they surprised me with the guest being Skullomania from the EX Layer series, this time his gender being involuntarily swapped. I suppose this was done to return the favor for having Terry in EX Layer. I just wish Skullomania wasn't wasted in SNK Heroines. In EX Layer, Terry came with a stage from Fatal Fury. Skullomania over here didn't even get alternate costumes like the rest of the cast, let alone a stage. SNK Heroines also had Thief Arthur from Million Arthur Arcana Blood. Million Arthur is a fighting game spin-off of a mobile card game series in Japan, and Iori appeared in this game as well. You've also got Trials of Mana character Riz and Sakayama from Lord of Vermilion 4. I'm not familiar with Lord of Vermilion, but this chick's design is a lot. She's like a half demon, half nurse. Someone go get this girl another shoe. Million Arthur was made by Square, and I'm curious as to why there weren't more Square characters included. It seems like SNK was returning some favors with these guests. I just wish they were in a better game. SNK proven they're still figuring this whole guest character thing, added Warden in Samurai Showdown. You know, the Warden! Coming from the Ubisoft pseudo-fighter For Honor, Warden isn't even a character, he's a class type. He is the definition of being just a function. I don't even know if For Honor was getting a lot of play back in 2019. It came out in 2017, and I thought the game fizzled out, but maybe I'm just underestimating the For Honor scene. If you didn't know Warden was a guest, you just think he's some generic knight, which he is. His obscurity was one-upped by Gung Sun Lee from Tencent's Honor of Kings. This is a MOBA for mobile devices and never came out in Western territories or even Japan. This character was free though, so it's hard to complain. I assume this was to help Samurai Showdown promote itself in China. If you want the character now though, she's since been removed from being downloaded. I'm glad they didn't region lock a character from the roster to the rest of the world at least, but what the hell is SNK's decision process? All of these guys are out-of-pocket picks. Perhaps SNK wanted to have stronger ties with these companies, but when was the last time we heard of a Ubisoft and SNK collab again? Thankfully, a safer pick was from SNK's own Last Blade series, Hibiki. She was only the second entry, but she was popular enough to be the top choice for Sam's show. Although, I'm sure her and CVS2 didn't hurt either. SNK does so many intercompany crossovers, it's easy to forget there's still crossovers. Like Ryo and Buriki 1 or Mr. Big and Fatal Fury aren't guests since they're integrated in the lore of that respective game. Hibiki being from a different time period altogether, and even though Last Blade and Sam's show probably take place in the same timeline, I do think she's a guest here. These series don't really cross over beyond dedicated crossover games anyways. The last pick thankfully was a great one, being Baiken from the Guilty Gear series. A character like Baiken being born in the wrong era is perfect for Sam's show. Guilty Gear being a fast-paced fighter with completely different mechanics, you'd think wouldn't translate to the slower, more methodical Sam's show, but they pulled it off. I just wish they had picks like Baiken sooner. With her inclusion, I can see that SNK can do guests faithfully to the series they came from after all. KOF 15 chose to forego outside guests and keep it in the family, but after this break, Fatal Fury City of the Wolves announced their first season of DLC would include 2 Street Fighters, Ken and Chun-Li. They aren't out yet as of this video, but looking at how Baiken was done, I'm excited to see how these Capcom fighters translate to City of the Wolves. The reception to these guys was positive, and we haven't even seen the characters in action yet. Surely SNK learned from their past mistakes on how to include guest characters people will actually be hyped for.
They are strong, like me.
Well, SNK decided to make a whole new mistake by including real human celebrities as guests. The football player Cristiano Ronaldo had a teaser trailer play early in City of the Wolves' marketing, and for months we had no idea what his inclusion would entail. I thought it would be like his jersey as an alternate costume, or perhaps him being in a commercial for the game. Instead, it was a full-fledged character.
Let's have some fun. For the love of the game.
He looks to have an interesting playstyle, and it's not often you get a football moveset in a fighter. Last I recall was in rival schools, but the issue here is that he just looks super out of place. He's a real dude and he's not playing a character or anything. His presence also doesn't match the art style of the game, making his appearance more off-putting. Why is he even included in the first place? Well, Ronaldo's team or club was owned by Al Nasser, which itself is owned by the Saudi Arabian conglomerate called the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund. SNK also being owned by that same company is certainly the main factor and makes that collab much easier to include. Ronaldo isn't someone I've personally heard of before, but that's because I don't know anything about any sport, period. He apparently has one of the most followed accounts on Instagram ever, and his fame speaks for itself in most of the world. I'd be hard-pressed to say that his inclusion will get newcomers into the game, though. Football fans would rather just stick with FIFA than try a whole new genre because of one character. They may think it's neat, but that won't translate to sales. Well, we'll see. I gotta be honest, I get the impression Ronaldo could care less about his inclusion, assuming he didn't already forget. He doesn't voice the character, he just did a couple of trailers, and his likeness is being used. He comes off as a character that was rushed in development. As of writing, he has no story mode of any kind, you can't edit his colors, and he doesn't even have his own stage. I don't even know what his stage would be, but people tell me they associate him with Las Vegas, so do that, I guess. They did this little interview with him asking questions about his inclusion of Fatal Fury, and they're the most broad and basic answers possible. What's your favorite move in the game, Ronaldo?
The special moves, of course. They are strong, like me.
Yeah, alright. Ronaldo, for being someone who's supposed to bring in a lot of fans, sure isn't easy to use. He plays very unique, and you have to keep track of your spirit soccer ball. It has physics of its own, and you can dribble and travel with it, which takes some getting used to. Quick update to this part from Babe Ruthless from the future. Ronaldo's team is no longer owned by Al Nassr, so the preservation for this game will sure be fun to see. Anyways, back to past Babe Ruthless. With Ronaldo, at least we know that the remaining characters are ones from Mark of the Wolves and not some other guest character nobody knows. Salvador Ganacci was seemingly the final straw for longtime Fatal Fury fans. First off, who was this guy? Well, he's another real-life person who's a DJ. His moveset, to SNK's credit, is very funny and makes for a good joke character, but I would have much preferred he was an original character instead. Ganacci is friends with the owners of the Saudi Arabian company that owns SNK, so I think it was just a matter of making a phone call to the Fatal Fury team to have it happen. Ronaldo, I'll admit I'm in my bubble and that's on me that I didn't know who he was. I won't deny the guy's a megastar, just don't look at that wiki. Ganacci though, he's nowhere near close to that level. The reaction to him, beyond the anger, was a collective, who is this? If he was an original character called DJ Ted or something, I think everyone would take to him much more positively. He plays and moves very goofily, and he really has a fun energy about him. It's not often that I see a character's DP act as a stance that will allow him to swim in the air. I get the impression that this guy doesn't take himself too seriously, and his character seems to reflect that. His YouTube channel has music videos with millions of views, but only 500,000 subs. That's a lot, don't get me wrong, but I know people with double that amount, and they're not in Fatal Fury. I saw him on stage at EVO Japan and was shocked to discover the Hotaru cosplayer next to him has way more of a following than him. Is Warden still available? Anyways, his moves seem to be references from his videos and dances, so SNK at least is giving attention to detail to this random DJ and aren't half-assed in it. His music videos are funny and have some anime inspiration, and I'm sure he's a nice dude, but his music just isn't for me. Perhaps if I were at a concert I'd feel different, but from what I'm hearing, it's just not to my taste. His trailer is charming too. It's him as a kid always wanting to be in Fatal Fury, and a genie comes out of an MVS cartridge I know he never owned and grants him a wish only to decline it. For someone who wanted to be in Fatal Fury, it's interesting he doesn't voice himself in the game. Ronaldo I get why he couldn't, but this guy could've. Come on, man. At least unlike Ronaldo, Ganacci seems excited to be in the game. I think that excitement is what got some of the FGC to warm up to his inclusion more. However, I am getting the impression that Salvador's inclusion is more effective advertising for him and his brand than it is for Fatal Fury's. Soul Calibur somewhat had a guest being Yoshimitsu from Tekken, although now he's been in every entry since. Both Tekken and Soul Calibur are owned by Namco, so I don't really consider him a guest at this point. He's a mainstay in the roster, and it'd be crazy if he was ever cut from a future entry. It'd be like calling Ryu Hayabusa a guest in Dead or Alive. The first true guest of Soul Calibur was one of the most famous ones being in Soul Calibur 2. Each console had its own exclusive guest, with Xbox having Spawn, PS2 with Heihachi from Tekken, and GameCube having Link from the Legend of Zelda series. Right off the bat, PS2 owners got ripped off. I love Tekken, and Heihachi is an iconic and important character, but comparing him to Link or Spawn, there's no contest. He does have a cool gimmick by not using a weapon, just his fists. Heihachi is fun to play as, and it's surreal to have this level of control over his movement. I believe this was the first time he was voicing a game in English too, and it's pretty fitting.
Who do you think you are?
Allegedly, Heihachi wasn't the initial guest character plan, and instead it was supposed to be Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, according to the localization producer for Namco, Naohiko. He didn't go too much into detail why it didn't happen, just that the deal fell through last minute. If this is true, perhaps it's because Square wanted Cloud for all consoles and didn't want to be exclusively tied with the PlayStation, or maybe they just asked for more money for licensing than Namco was willing to shell out. It's surprising Soul Calibur never did a proper Tekken character again, since it'd be easy to just shove any of them in there if they wanted to. Devil Jin's playstyle in Soul Calibur 5 was only available through the Create a Character mode, but not Devil Jin himself, which is disappointing. Perhaps that was done to legitimize the created characters by giving them a unique moveset. I just wish Devil Jin the character was brought over, not just his function. I suppose rather than a guest character, this is a guest moveset. Looking at Spawn, it's easy to surmise why he was picked and why on the Xbox. Todd McFarlane was having a Spawn game developed by Namco that would release the following year after Soul Calibur 2. I'm sure during that time, it was easy to ask Todd for Spawn's inclusion. They also had Todd create Necrid, a character who will never return to the series. McFarlane was also doing the toy line for Soul Calibur, so it seems like they had a strong partnership with Namco. Why Xbox though? I assume this was mostly because Spawn is an American character, and Xbox was an American-centric console. I'm sure it didn't hurt that his color palette also happened to match the consoles too, but I think that's a happy coincidence. Might also depend on what characters were approved first. Assuming they got the okay to use Link first from Nintendo, Namco of course couldn't use Link for anything but the GameCube, so perhaps Spawn was added after to give the other consoles someone to replace Link? Maybe Spawn was planned to be in both the Xbox and PS2 version? Assuming the alleged Cloud inclusion was initially real, maybe Square only wanted Cloud for the PS2 version and so Spawn was just defaulted to the Xbox. Or, throwing all this out the window, Namco just offered an exclusive character to each console for some kind of marketing deal. Who knows? As far as how Spawn plays, he uses a battle axe, which I don't think he's really associated with compared to his cape, chains, and guns, none of which he has in his gameplay. This was probably a technical decision, since all that would have been way more work than the team bargained for. They gave him the axe to better suit the rest of the roster. He can also fly and shoot projectiles, and I love that he can throw his axe around and style on his opponents. Bro does love his crotch thrust though. The most famous of these three is of course Link, and this version seems to be pulled from Ocarina of Time since all of his weapons are references from that particular entry. Link is a blast to play, and he can even switch to other projectiles like his bomb, boomerang, and bow on the fly. Link's grabs are also slight nods to his game, like riding Epona or pushing heavy objects, which looks hilarious when he does it on a person. Link was added since Nintendo helped develop the arcade board Soul Calibur 2 runs on, and when ported to the console, Nintendo okayed the use of Link to Namco. This also might be the best-selling version too, and proved to Namco that guests can help the series a lot, which was a lesson that was ignored in Soul Calibur 3. This game was a PS2 exclusive, and it was disappointing that there wasn't any guests this time. I keep hearing Dante was planned for this game, but that was never true. I recommend checking out Stumblebee's video on the topic, in which he does a fantastic job dissecting the origin of this rumor. When Soul Calibur 2 released an HD remaster for 360 and PS3, both Spawn and Heihachi were together in both versions, finally allowing them to face off. Unfortunately, no Link, since this version never released on a Nintendo console. The Wii U was the main console for them at the time, and putting anything on that was destined to bomb. Perhaps if the Switch was out then, we could have gotten a version with all three guests together. It's a pity. Link did return in the digital port of the GameCube version of 2, which is only for the Switch 2 GameCube app, and you need to be subscribed to play it. Sadly, you can't buy this on its own and play it offline. Link is on parole if anything. For the following gen, Soul Calibur 4 went all out. I honestly don't know what guest characters could have been a bigger get than Darth Vader and Yoda. These two are probably some of the most popular and well-known characters in all of fiction. I think the shock of their inclusion is lost on people nowadays, but this was something everybody thought impossible. At the time, people frequently brought up that it was ridiculous that a lightsaber wouldn't just cut through all these swords, but honestly, who cares? It's magic or whatever. They separated Yoda and Vader to be exclusive for the Xbox 360 and PS3 respectively, and this time I do think it was because of the color of the consoles and characters. Darth Vader is one of my favorite characters to play in the whole series. He moves stiff and slow, but that's how the actual character would move. He makes up for it with power and force abilities, which have a separate meter. Being able to force choke mid-grab or juggle your opponents is a blast. He's not voiced by the original actor James Earl Jones, but by Matt Sloan.
Don't underestimate the power of the Force.
Matt voiced Darth Vader in Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and he was discovered after voicing Vader in YouTube skits and sounds perfect.
You agreed to stay away!
I lied.
Yoda, I'ma be real, is one of my least favorite guest characters ever. I have no problem with the character himself, but rather with how he plays. It was ambitious to have a playable character so short, but I think that screws up how he's balanced. Yoda's slow if he runs on his feet, but if you dash he goes into a jump. This makes him awkward to control and allows him to be juggled more easily. His height prevents him from being grabbed, but he's still tall enough to be hit with most horizontal attacks. To make up for this though, his guard meter is greatly reduced, allowing guard breaks to happen very quickly. This is important because in Soul Calibur 4, this can mean instant death, since to activate critical finish, you just need to hit a single button once your opponent's guard breaks. Yoda just isn't fun to play as or play against, but I respect the attempt. Around a year later, both characters and the stage they came with were DLC for the console they weren't initially on, allowing players to face both against each other. The last Star Wars character included was the apprentice from the game The Force Unleashed. He was called the apprentice in Soul Calibur, but his name is actually Starkiller. This allegedly is because there was a back and forth with the Force Unleashed devs and George Lucas on his final name. The devs wanted Darth Vader's original name, Starkiller, and George wanted Darth Icky. I like how he controls with his different zoning and movement options. His character design was certainly the style at the time, and just like with Cole, it doesn't stand out all too much unfortunately nowadays. I do think it's funny that sometimes when hit, dude sounds like he's gonna cry. These Star Wars characters proved having the right guests can make a game, with this entry being the best selling in the series at the time. The argument can be made that these guests overshadow the main cast, which certainly is a valid point. Unfortunately, the Star Wars characters didn't act as a Trojan horse for potential new fans, and what I mean is people who bought this for the Star Wars stuff didn't seem interested to get the next game without them. With Soul Calibur 2 setting expectations for having such great guest picks and Heihachi, Soul Calibur 3 not having one was disappointing, and I think that might have reflected in its sales, hence them going big with the Star Wars characters. One weird oddity in this roster was the character Angle Fear. She was one of the several bonus characters that had an anime style to them and a copied moveset from someone else in the roster. This character wasn't a guest at first either, since this was her first ever appearance. However, she does make a small cameo in the manga Surgeon Frog. It's not until volume 19, and it's only for like one page though. A lot of work went into Angle and these bonus characters. They have their own voice actors and even arcade mode endings. Angle has a staff with like a moon on it and uses Sungmina style, so perhaps like Earthworm Jim, this is more of a guest costume too. Star Wars was a tough act to follow, and I don't think there would be a single guest that could rival Soul Calibur 4's, which is why people seem to be disappointed over Ezio from Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed series and Soul Calibur 5. I've never played a game from this series, but even still, I thought Ezio was a great pick. I mean, come on, his look is just so iconic. He fights with hidden blades and other ranged weapons, and he has just such a cool swagger. It was disappointing he had no story mode or proper stage though. Soul Calibur 5 seemed to have had a rush development, so I assumed that had to be left at the wayside. Ezio wasn't a console-specific exclusive either, he was in both versions of the game. It's a bummer people see Ezio as the low point for the guests. He fits well in a fighter, and I think he'd be a fitting choice in Smash Bros as well. Before Soul Calibur 5, Namco released a PSP version of 4 called Soul Calibur Broken Destiny. No Star Wars dudes here, but instead we have Kratos from God of War. His moves are mostly pulled from God of War 2, and this version of Kratos feels fast. Since there's barely any story in this PSP version, Kratos doesn't have any character interactions or arcade endings. I wonder if he was in Soul Calibur 4 where he would stand competitively, because he feels really good in this game. Kratos might be the last time Soul Calibur ever does a console exclusive character, since console exclusive guests have gone by the wayside at this point. Regardless, that character would be automatically banned in tournaments, since if you have it on one console and not the other, you can't train against that matchup. Soul Calibur 6 at launch included Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series, another popular game character like Ezio, although technically Geralt originated from a book. He only has a minuscule amount of story in-game, mostly boiling down to him going through a portal from his world into Soul Calibur's. Even when it's minimal, I do think that it's fun to give the guests a little bit of story at least. These crossovers don't happen often, and they might as well celebrate it in some way. Glad to see Geralt has his own stage too. He plays pretty straightforward with his long swords and magic, and doesn't do that many fantastical things compared to the rest of the cast. He's still an overall solid inclusion. Soul Calibur 6 finally embraced DLC and added 2 more guests, the first being the android 2B from the Nier series. I am extremely biased, but I think 2B is the best guest Soul Calibur has ever had. Her stage being the city ruins is great, and the closest this cast has gotten to the modern world. Her playstyle is amazing, with her having combo strings straight from her game. She can even self-destruct and show that booty, or she can style on fools and go fish with her pod. They went all out here. This is one of the few guest characters where they allowed her appearance to be fully customized and her clothes destructible. She came out in a time before 2B started appearing in every game under the sun, but she's a hot anime chick from a legendary game. What's the issue of her being in everything anyways? The final guest was SNK's Haomaru from Samurai Showdown. I'm surprised they chose him over Nakaruru, but perhaps they wanted to have an actual samurai to represent Samurai Showdown. Plus, having him face off against Mitsurugi makes for a cool visual. This is the best Haohmaru has been translated in a 3D fighter, and without having to sacrifice his playstyle. He has his projectiles and DP attacks, and they work well in a 3D fighter. One criticism I would say is that Haohmaru probably is not going to appeal to folks outside of the FGC, since for casual fans, he's just another samurai. I love it when a guest themselves is from a fighting game, but you're getting a smaller pool of potential fans by doing that, since the casual players aren't going to come flocking over like they would from characters from non-fighting games. Haohmaru and 2B didn't have any added story for them, which is a bummer because the non-guest DLC editions did get that. They even got the voice actors for the guests to record a few new lines just for Soul Calibur, so it seems like a missed opportunity. Tekken actually beat Soul Calibur to the punch with including guests, but they took a long break in between. Starting with Tekken 3, the stunted dino Gon from the manga of the same name was added to the PS1 version. Gon seems random even if you lived in Japan and knew who he was. Most people just assumed he was another wacky dinosaur. Alex was a boxing raptor in Tekken 2, so another dino wasn't that crazy of an inclusion at this point. His shorter profile makes him impossible to grab, but unlike Yoda, Gon is fun to play, but maybe not to fight. He's certainly a skill check character, forcing your opponent to practice their mids and lows. Gon is one of the few characters with a projectile which is unblockable. Speaking of unblockables, watch out for those farts. His alternate costume is a reference to his manga, where in that particular volume he wears a turtle shell and guides a bunch of baby turtles to safety, which is one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a manga, by the way. Haven't read a lot of this, and I use the term "red" loosely, I don't think he really fits in the Tekken world. He's just as random as Negan. Not saying I'm not happy he's here, but as a first guest, the Tekken team established early on there were no rules on who can be included. Even though I don't think he fits, fans took to him positively, which shows a guest doesn't always have to be someone super well known to be successful. 18 years later, Tekken 7 shocked everyone by having Akuma from Street Fighter not only in the base roster, but being an integral part in story mode. Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which was created by Capcom, used Namco characters, so as a trade-off, Namco was allowed to put a Capcom character into their game. I suppose this was Namco politely telling us that Tekken Cross Street Fighter wasn't gonna happen, and this was our consolation prize. Akuma is used wisely in Tekken 7, and since Namco had free reign to do whatever they wanted, he's now canon in Tekken's world. His appearance can be fully customized, and he even got his own stage. Interesting, no music from Street Fighter is included though, not even a remix version of his theme. This is the perfect example of how guest characters should be used. Every time Akuma showed up in the story, the hypest shit followed. He probably single-handedly saved the story mode if anything. A while after the console launched for 7, DLC for additional guests was added, the first being Geese from Fatal Fury, who was another perfect pick.
Bring it on. I'll destroy you all.
Him and Akuma were so fun in Tekken's engine. I always wondered how 2D characters like this would work in Tekken, and I'm happy about how they turned out. The same can't be said with how the competitive scene felt about them though. They were a curse on the scene and were always considered top tier. They just weren't playing Tekken since they were amazing up close and from far away, and players had to rewire their brains on how to deal with them. They had meter from their respective games that gave them abilities no one else in the cast had. After Akuma and Geese, I was left to think the theme for the other guests was fighting game villains, and I was starting to think Rugal or Shao Kahn was next, but to my surprise, it was Noctis from Final Fantasy XV. I was certainly caught off guard, but still stoked for him. Being one of the few people who love Final Fantasy XV, Noctis was a pick that was seemingly made for me. He teleports by throwing his sword and uses multiple weapons mixed with magic. The character uses his Japanese voice actor, which to me is Square saying this is his canon voice and language, just like how Akuma only speaks Japanese and Geese speaks English since he's American. Geese's voice actor is so good, I keep thinking he was always his voice actor. Noctis, just like Geese, got a trailer that showed he had a place in the Tekken world by being Lars' fishing buddy. I know for Geese and Noctis' trailers, it's not really canon to either universe like it is with Akuma, but I'm glad these at least flex the crossover a bit since there isn't an arcade mode ending for any DLC characters. There was a rumor that Noctis was meant for Soul Calibur and 2B for Tekken, and I would have loved to see what that alternate timeline looked like, but I think they're both in the games that suit them the best. Noctis' inclusion changed what I, at the time, perceived to be the rules of who could guest in Tekken. I now assumed it had to be characters from video games like in Smash.
pissing our pants yet?
I was proven wrong when a character from the Walking Dead comic showed up, Negan. This version of him is specifically from the AMC show played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. His likeness was used, but it's hard to tell if he recorded new voice lines for this. In the trailer, he definitely did new VO, but in gameplay, I can't say for sure. It doesn't help that he says the exact same stuff in the show anyways. I wish there was dialogue that he would only say in Tekken, have him name drop someone at least. Negan is curiously absent in the Japanese arcade version. I assume the deal to have him included in that costs a bit more perhaps. It's odd though, since it's not like he's unknown in Japan, Walking Dead has a pretty decent fan base in the country. Hideo Kojima watched the show and included Norman Reedus in his game after all, and Harada and Michael Murray were also fans, hence Negan's inclusion. Negan appeared at the end of Season 6, which premiered in 2016. The following season, where he was more prominent, aired in 2017. But Negan was added to Tekken in 2019, making it 2 years past his relevancy, making his inclusion even more off-putting to people. I think this just goes to show how long these deals can take. I do think Harada and the folks at Namco got the ball rolling on Negan probably in 2017. Just look at Noctis. Final Fantasy XV dropped in 2016, whereas Noctis came to Tekken 7 in 2018. When a character is timeless like Geese and Akuma, you don't really look at the last game they were released in. Negan is a cool character, and I'm sure it was a safe bet at the time that The Walking Dead would be popular forever with all the buzz with Negan specifically and all of the spin-off shows. When he was released, Walking Dead's popularity was at an all-time low. The show just had no end in sight, and the spin-offs oversaturated the brand. With that, and being 6 years removed from his release, Negan's inclusion has aged quite poorly.
You the developers? The ones that pull that releasing characters one at a time? You're gonna put me in the next update, right, Harada?
Tekken 8 chose not to launch with a guest this time, which is fair since I think Tekken's cast can stand on their own. At the end of the first season of DLC, Final Fantasy XVI's Clive was added to the roster with him speaking only English, which makes sense since 16's marketing was targeted more towards a Western audience.
And I
Clive was also released 2 years after his game dropped, which kinda confirms my theory on how long deals like this take. As a fan of 16, Clive was sick, and I'm glad he wasn't just another Noctis. He uses the power of all the summons in his kit, and even Leviathan. Leviathan in particular was added as DLC for 16 far after its launch, so I'm glad it's legitimized in some way by also having it in Tekken. Funny enough, if you're in the middle of playing 16, some of his moves might be spoilers, which is what happened to me. Luckily though, it's minor since you don't really get the context of how he obtains these summons. When Clive was announced, I started playing his game for more background on him. I don't like seeing characters as just functions, so if I can help it, I want to learn more about guest characters like this by playing the game they come from. I know everyone was saying the guest should have been Tifa and Clive should have been in Soul Calibur, blah blah blah. If a guy has a weapon in Tekken, people always default to saying that they should be in Soul Calibur. There's multiple characters with weapons in Tekken, y'all. Just goes to show any fighting style can fit in Tekken, it's not all just fists. Same thing with Soul Calibur, they had characters with just fists and they fit in perfectly fine. Besides, it's not like there's a new Soul Calibur game for Clive to be in anyways. Tifa just seems like a lazy answer to me. Final Fantasy VII is one of my favorite games ever, and Tifa is one of my favorite characters. I'm sure she would be fun in Tekken, but her moveset in Final Fantasy and what she had in Dissidia doesn't really excite me. If you told me Aerith would be in Tekken, then I'd be interested in seeing what the hell that would look like as opposed to Tifa. Besides, would Tifa get more eyeballs on Tekken than someone like Cloud or Sephiroth? Personally, I think Final Fantasy VII in particular is a bit oversaturated right now, but if Tifa is eventually included, it's overall fine with me, I suppose. Clive's moveset just sounds more interesting to me as someone who can control all of the Final Fantasy summons in one moveset versus a girl that punches and kicks a lot and can summon some dolphins. I get that she's very cool, but it just comes off as an uncreative choice. Now, I'm sure all the Tifa fans are gonna have a very measured response.
実にクオリティの高いコスプレだ。気に入ったぞ。
Dead or Alive dipped their toes with guests by having Zack don a costume from the forgotten acclaimed title Shadow Man in DOA 2 and the remake DOA 2 Ultimate. We didn't get a proper guest character until DOA 4, where we got the often forgotten Spartan 458 or Nicole from the Halo series. Since DOA 4 was exclusive to Xbox 360 and that series was so integral to the Xbox brand at that point, I think this was just Tecmo's way of paying respect to Microsoft. DOA was an exclusive series to Xbox for a while. This respect was paid back in Halo 3 by having one of the unlockable multiplayer armors be the Hayabusa armor, which resembles Ryu Hayabusa. Even though Nicole is from the Halo series, she's never appeared in a Halo game, just DOA 4. I have a conspiracy theory that Microsoft was overly protective of Master Chief at that time, since he was considered the mascot of the Xbox brand. Even though the armor Nicole wears is the exact same one that Master Chief wears in Halo 2, maybe they said it was a different character because perhaps they didn't want him getting beat up. Or maybe it's even simpler than that and they just couldn't get the voice actor for Master Chief. Who knows? Actually playing as Nicole, she barely has any Halo-specific moves. If we include her taunt, she has 2. Perhaps being a series associated with shooting, they didn't want to have projectiles in her kit for balance reasons and gave her a more generic MMA moveset instead. This particular moveset was eventually given to Rachel from the Ninja Gaiden series in DOA 5 and 6, so if Nicole was your main, you at least had her functionality intact moving forward. When Nicole was revealed, it wasn't via a trailer, but rather the magazine Game Informer, with it just having screenshots of her inclusion. Most people buying DOA 4 wouldn't have really known she was in the game, not to mention she was also a secret character that took some time to unlock, so a lot of people probably just never got her. These factors might contribute to why this Spartan is often forgotten.
That is how you hit like a girl.
DOA 5 went nuts with guests. From the Virtua Fighter series, we got Akira, Sarah Bryant, and Pi included in the base roster. This was a full circle moment since DOA started as a Virtua Fighter clone and one of its main competitors. Both series having the exact same button schemes makes these 3 guests fit in seamlessly. They just reuse voice lines from their previous games, so it can be kinda off-putting to hear lower quality audio from them, but I don't know, it kinda adds to the charm. Maybe if they had a low poly graphics alternate costume it would fit better, but I kinda dig the Woody doll audio quality.
Ha! Yeah! I'm no pushover, sweetie.
They even got small cameos in story mode. You don't get to play as them, just beat their asses, but the Virtua Fighter character isn't shown being beaten in the cutscene, just disappearing. I assume this was done to be more respectful to the series, but then why not just make them playable for a fight instead? DOA 5 got a big update when ported to the PS4 with another Virtua Fighter, Jackie. This entry also got DLC for a guest stage based on Attack on Titan, as well as costumes, but curiously, no proper character. The next actual guest was Naotora Lee from Tecmo's Samurai Warriors series, a Japanese-themed spin-off to Dynasty Warriors. This girl is definitely one of those anime archetype characters where she's overly apologetic and whiny. That trope drives me insane.
Sorry! I'm so sorry I won the fight!
In spite of that, I do love the way she plays, a kick-focused character with a lot of extra flair. Too bad she's just so damn annoying. It wasn't until SNK's Mai that we got an outside company guest since the 4 Virtua Fighters. Just like Akuma, she works great in a 3D game and is one of the few characters to actually have a projectile in DOA. Being such a late addition, Mai didn't get too many alternate costumes or even any story mode content, sadly. Thankfully, she returned as DLC in DOA 6 along with Kula Diamond from King of Fighters. Both got more costumes and some small playable cameos in the story. It was kinda annoying that Mai was paid DLC again instead of being base roster, but I assume this was done to offset potential licensing costs. It's also rare for a guest character to return in a future entry. Kula in DOA looks amazing. When has her hair ever looked better than this? I love that her run is just her ice skating too, that's super cute. In KOF, I believe her canonical age is 14. Interesting, in her DOA profile, it's left unknown. These 2 were the only guests in DOA 6 since the game's shelf life wasn't too long due to its poor sales. Mai sadly can't be bought in DOA 5 anymore either. Now that Virtua Fighter is back, perhaps they can return the favor to DOA for when VF was on ice. We'll see if Virtua Fighter will budge on guests soon enough. With anime fighters, there's an uphill battle with how casual fans view their guests. For a fighter like Under Night In-Birth, most of the cast is unknown to people who play games as a whole and the wider FGC. If I told those guys that Under Night In-Birth got Akatsuki from Akatsuki BlizzConf, no one's gonna know what the hell I'm talking about. Akatsuki and Melty Blood's Eltnum are only gonna appeal to a very niche group of Under Night fans. These guys fit in almost too well. It wasn't until I played Eltnum's story mode that I found that she was a guest. Her story mode breaks the fourth wall and just straight up says her appearance isn't canon since she's a guest character. She acts like the veteran compared to the Under Night cast since she keeps referring to them as rookies. Eltnum is one of the main characters in Melty Blood up until Type Lumina. Around 2010, the devs of French Bread were working on Melty Blood HD, but since the devs of Type Moon were working on another game, they delayed Melty Blood HD, and French Bread made Under Night instead, and then got permission from Type Moon to use Eltnum. That's the short version of how Under Night came to be and Eltnum was included. The crossover title BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle combined rosters from BlazBlue, Under Night, Persona Arena, and Ruby. With crossovers, it can come off as tacky having an unrelated IP join as a third wheel, like in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. With BlazBlue Cross having 4 IPs in the mix, including more doesn't seem that off-putting comparatively. Akatsuki and Blitztank from the Blitzkampf series were added as DLC. Now Akatsuki can speak English for the first and only time.
I will snuff out every spark that rains upon me.
You've also got Heart Aino from the Arcana Heart series and Yumi from Senran Kagura. This tank is the most famous character from his own game and definitely caught everyone's eye since, just look at him. In the tank's lore, there's actually multiple Blitz tanks, none are unique. There's a skull at the top because these are humans turned into tanks. Creepy. Arcana Heart is one of the better anime fighters out there and it's been around for quite a bit. It's cool that the series is being paid its dues with one of the biggest anime fighters of the time. She even has an all-new sprite just for BlazBlue Cross. Senran Kagura, I have no clue where the connection is from. It's a series whose origin isn't a fighter, but more of an action game. Yumi is a cool inclusion, but this character and this game are my only connection to her series. I'm surprised BlazBlue remained pure with no guests in any of the main games. They waited until this crossover spin-off to get that out of their system. A fighting game based on an anime like Dragon Ball FighterZ, I would normally never consider the possibility of a guest character. It's a licensed property of a big IP, and adding a guest just takes away attention from those characters, making rights holders of that IP not really jump at adding guests from series they don't own. An exception I can think of is Lars from Tekken and Naruto Ninja Storm 2. Even though both Tekken and this Naruto game were both made by Namco, I was still surprised to see Lars here. The mangaka for Naruto, Masashi Kishimoto, designed a Lars alternate costume for Tekken 6. I assume that was the main connection of how he was included. Oddly though, for that game's re-release, Lars was cut, despite the fact that the game was still made and released by Namco. Jump Force is a crossover full of Shonen Jump characters fighting in a mix of their worlds and the real world. One character that caught my eye was Dai from the Dragon Quest anime. The anime was made by Jump, but they don't own the Dragon Quest IP. This character I assume they can use freely without Square, but any references to the Dragon Quest games might be off limits. There's no sign of his slime or any musical cues from the series either. Not quite sure if this guy counts. Garoden Breakblow is based on a martial arts novel that was eventually adapted as a manga made by Keisuke Itagaki and Baku Yumemakura, who also created Baki the Grappler. With that connection, they added in the main antagonist from that series, the ogre himself, Yujiro Hamna. This dude is in both the first and second games as a secret character, and he's a nightmare to unlock. In the first game, you have to complete survival mode and beat 100 opponents. Jesus, I suppose he's a tough dude in Baki, so I guess it makes sense that the struggle of fighting him is replicated in his unlock process. Second game, it's easier since it's just one fight you can do after you beat all 50 fights in story mode. He'll be an optional EX fight, and he's still a monster to take down. This dude is so OP and can beat opponents in one hit. Might be one of the most unfair guest characters out there. He's fun to play when I pick him, but fuck you if you choose him. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Stars guest is Boa from a manga of the same creator. Boa is the name of a parasite attached to its host Ikura Hashisawa. This character and their world, as far as I've seen, isn't directly canon to the JoJo story. He makes a cameo in the anime reading his own manga, but that's it. Something similar to this would be in Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi 3, where Ariel from Dr. Slump is playable, but that series is directly tied to Dragon Ball in both the anime and manga. With Boa and JoJo, that doesn't seem to be the case. This crossover, I'm sure, is due to the creators of both series being the same. As someone whose knowledge of JoJo doesn't go beyond the Capcom fighter, the whole cast is a bunch of weirdos, so this guy isn't someone I would have guessed wasn't from the series. They got a bird here for crying out loud. For Boa, I don't know why, but I'm getting some Devilman vibes from him. Grand Blue is a popular mobile game in Japan that blew the hell up and eventually got a fighting game spin-off. The mobile game had crossovers and collabs at the time. For Fantasy Versus though, I didn't expect a guess since I figured they wanted the attention solely on the Grand Blue cast. It wasn't a game I had a particular interest in, but when 2B was added, then it was on my radar. The marketing worked on me since 2B got me in the door. This series is something I definitely want to play more of. Motohiro Okubo was the producer of Soul Calibur 6 and now works for Sai Games. I'm sure he still had connections at Square to get 2B again for Grand Blue. Her coming from a game with fast-paced and fluid action translated just as well to a fighter, be it 3D or 2D. She can even serve as a narrator in the main menu or commentate your matches in chibi form. Her colors though, Square must have a big issue with other color palettes since this isn't the first time they've kept alt colors low-key. Her 2P color is great and was even made canon in Final Fantasy XIV, but color 3 and onward you can barely tell are different. If I squint, I can see they're very dark blues or greens. Soul Calibur let us do whatever the hell we wanted to her costumes. We could fuck 2B up. Why is it so held back in Grand Blue? As of now, 2B is the only guest in the game, and when the third season was announced, there was no guest in sight. Perhaps 2B is a one and done, but it's too bad since it shows ArcSys can go all out with characters outside their bubble. Grand Blue proper has plenty of crossovers, so it would be a shame if the fighter just did it the one time. Killer Instinct being owned by Microsoft allowed it to include characters from Xbox IPs. The 2013 entry was able to stand on its own without the help of guests, and it was only in the third season that KI decided that it was the right time, the guests being Arbiter from Halo, Rash from Battletoads, and General Rom from Gears of War. Looking at Rash, Battletoads was made by Rare, so it's cool to see the IP being used after so long. He adds a goofy tone to the cast which I feel was sorely missing. He fights like a Looney Tune by turning into objects or exaggerating his features on a whim. His alternates also have him donning references to other Rare-made games like Banjo and Conquer. Rash's classic alternate has him in a more colorful and sleeker look, as opposed to his default, where it looks like he needs chapstick ASAP. It's funny, he says in his win quote,
"These cameos are killing me."
But dude's only cameoed in like Shovel Knight. I don't know why Rash has acted like he's over cameos, since it's the only work he's gonna get for a long time. Arbiter was an interesting inclusion, since it wasn't Master Chief himself, which adds to my theory that Microsoft doesn't want Chief beat up. This Arbiter isn't the one from Halo 2, but a generic one instead. Maybe this was to avoid canon, or quickly explain why his voice actor Keith David is different, but whatever, he has an alternate of the classic Arbiter anyways. True to his series, Arbiter only holds two weapons, being the Plasma Sword and the Covenant Carbine. The latter allows you to quickly take potshots on your opponent mid-combo. He can even go into his stealth mode, use overshield, and chuck plasma grenades.
Another victory, yes, but there is always another battle.
General Rom from Gears of War was the main antagonist of the first game. The dude uses guns in that one, but here it's just his knife and swarm of krill, which are bat-like creatures that tear apart prey in the dark. Rom is one of the tallest characters in the game, and he's a slow powerhouse. I do think choosing Rom instead of someone like Marcus Phoenix was the best choice here, since KI is full of freaks already. Rom, Arbiter, and Rash fit right in. It's too bad he and Rash didn't get their own stage. I wonder if other characters were ever considered, since Mira has an alt as Jack of Blades from Fable. Maybe they did some work on this outfit with the intent of Jack being a separate character, but made it a costume instead. KI characters are awesome, and it's a shame that they don't get to be guest characters. I really hope they get a chance to star in another fighter someday. Platform fighters are all over the place with their guests. Since the subgenre is typically a crossover of a particular IP, that's usually a good excuse to throw some guests into the fray. Let's just get this one out of the way. Looking at the platform fighter genre, I'm sure that you're all thinking of Ubisoft's TMNT Smash Up. Prior to release, the devs straight up said there would be Ubisoft characters appearing as unlockables in the roster. That had everyone hyped. Are we gonna see Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell, Dastan from Prince of Persia, maybe even Rayman? Well, I'm half right with that last one. Instead, we got some rabbits from the spin-off Rayman games dressed as a character I would have preferred. I don't even hate the rabbits that much, but damn, we really need this many. We couldn't have had just one and maybe another Ubisoft character for variety. Why did one of them have to be dressed up as Sam Fisher when they could have just been Sam Fisher? I think the reception wouldn't have been bad if it was just one rabbit instead. Since PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale is a crossover of PlayStation IPs, a guest in a game like this would be a third-party character or someone Sony doesn't own. PS All-Stars has what I consider a more cynical guest selection. First announced was Big Daddy from BioShock, who is a cool character, but as the first announced third-party character, it's a bit weird. PS3 got BioShock a year after it came out on PC and Xbox, making this inclusion not feel very PlayStation. His inclusion seemed to be to promote BioShock Infinite, which wasn't out at the time of PS All-Stars release. Big Daddy isn't in Infinite, but he has a stage that takes place in that game's world. BioShock Infinite, though, got delayed so much that some of the designs of the characters in the stage actually changed in later patches of All-Stars. Later, it was announced that Dante from the reboot of Devil May Cry was going to be included as a PS All-Star. A reboot, mind you, that wasn't exactly getting the best press since it was disregarding a beloved series. This entry also wasn't out at the time of PS All-Stars release. This stranger had yet to prove himself. Dante's new look debuting in a platform fighter wasn't the best first impression. Having now played the DMC reboot, I can say it is a fantastic game, but this isn't a fantastic Dante. They really couldn't get him better alts than just him removing an article of clothing. Thank God he doesn't have a fourth alt. Metal Gear is a series close to my heart, so when I heard that Raiden was being added, I was really excited. I was thinking that his inclusion meant that Snake was also gonna be added shortly after, but sadly he wasn't ever coming. Raiden's inclusion was less a celebration of his history with the Metal Gear series and more so an ad for Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Just like with the other two guests, an ad for a title not out yet. Having released, I can now say that Revengeance is an incredible title that has only gotten better with age. Little weird to have Raiden solo represent the Metal Gear series though and not Snake. It's neat the outfits he has are from Metal Gear Solid 2 and 4, and he is one of the most fun to play among the cast. It's just too bad it's in this game. The fourth third-party inclusion was Heihachi Mishima from Tekken. This out of all the guests makes the most sense. He has a younger appearance, which is from his Tekken Tag 2 look, which was out a year prior to this. Yes, his inclusion is to promote Tag 2, but it being Heihachi, one of the faces of the series, and not like JC, it comes off as more genuine. Besides, his alternates have his older self in outfits he wore in Tekken 3 and 4. Beyond his signature attacks, he can throw the beach ball from Tekken Ball mode or a Heihachi trophy, which appears as an actual trophy but doubles as bowling pins in Tekken Bowl mode. His level 2 has a cameo from Kuma, and his level 3 recreates his ending from Tekken 5. Everything about Heihachi celebrates his long history, and not just whatever latest entry they're trying to pimp out. The final guest added as post-launch DLC was EA's Isaac Clarke from Dead Space. He's here to promote Dead Space 3. That game released a month prior to Isaac being added here. The third entry was not received well and is largely credited to killing the franchise. Isaac in this case I think is like Heihachi, meaning it's a celebration of the character since he has alts with his appearances from his trilogy as well as his whole moveset. This series was pretty new at the time, living and dying all on the PS3. I know he was mostly included to promote Dead Space 3, but I'm glad it's not exclusively referential to that. It's interesting hearing about other guests that were considered and ultimately not included, such as Lara Croft. She had an integral role early on with the PlayStation brand, but she's absent here. Lara had a reboot coming out at the time, and the folks making that game didn't want her to be playable in All-Stars before her own game released. Wise move ultimately, since it would have yet again come across as another ad, and this reboot Lara would still be a stranger to us since yet again her game hadn't proven to be good at that time. Allegedly, Square chose not to include any of their folks since this game hadn't proven itself as a series yet, ironically, but I think the real reason is that Square likely charges a big premium for their characters. Crash and Spyro were considered mascots for the PS1 era, and they were nowhere to be seen here. This is due to them being owned by Activision, and Crash didn't have a game to pimp out like Spyro did with Skylanders. I assume Activision just straight up said no. Spyro himself was becoming detached from Skylanders as that series continued to grow, and his name was eventually taken off the title. Crash had nothing going on either until he himself was in Skylanders. I assume Activision didn't want to promote these guys since fans might think something substantial for both was around the corner when it wasn't. Or perhaps simply Activision just charged too much. With PS All-Stars, I get the impression that third parties told Sony who to include, unlike for Smash where Nintendo tells the third parties who they're gonna include. I know everyone loves kicking Multiverse's corpse, but the game ain't all that bad. The devs allegedly planned to have guests that weren't owned by Warner Bros., but that never came to fruition. Player First Games did make an original character, Rain Dog, that was apparently meant for another game. Even though he's original to this, he's still owned by WB. The only character I'd consider a guest in this crossover is LeBron James. I know you're gonna say he's in the second Space Jam, which was made by Warner Bros., and yes, he's mostly here to cross-promote that. But LeBron the person isn't owned by WB. I guess some of his games air on TNT, which is owned by Warner Bros., but I consider LeBron a celebrity guest character for the most part. He's not voiced by LeBron himself, which is no biggie since this is more of a cartoon version of him anyways. I genuinely wonder if LeBron even knows he's in this game. I assume he's so mega famous and has bigger fish to fry that he's never even heard of multiverses. He's in a shitload of games already, so what's one more to someone like him? We're gonna be on this series for a minute, folks. Ever since the third entry for Smash, Brawl expectations for third-party characters were sky high. Snake was shown during the game's reveal trailer, and I couldn't process what I was seeing. Even when it said Snake was joining the fight, I assumed it was a joke until I started seeing screenshots of him in-game on the Smash Bros. Dojo. Snake was apparently supposed to be in Melee, but Kojima asked Sakurai for his inclusion too far into development. Despite my love for Metal Gear, if we're being honest, if Snake was never in Smash, I don't think most people would be clamoring for him, since his series on the surface is very serious and murderous compared to the rest of the cast. I would argue that he's just as goofy and cartoonish as everyone else, the cardboard box being sort of the main symbol of that. Metal Gear on the outside might not look like it, but it's filled with a lot of humor and it doesn't take itself too seriously. Snake doesn't use guns and instead focuses on his gadgets for his moveset. I absolutely love the way he plays as a trap character. You essentially build an obstacle course for your opponent and they need to learn to navigate through all your bullshit. He dons his appearance from Metal Gear Solid 2, which he wears the least of any entry, but it's an iconic look. I do wish he had an alt of his Metal Gear Solid 1 outfit though, I would argue that's just as memorable. Perhaps Sakurai knew that Snake's ass in 2 was just too powerful.
Ready? Go! Falcon Punch!
Sonic is someone who was rumored to be a super secret character in Melee, which wasn't true, just like how there was a rumor that Goku was a secret character in Smash 64. In Brawl though, the dream became real when Sonic was added late in development, which potentially delayed the game a little. Man, I sure hope that most of Sonic's moves aren't just him going into a ball. Damn. I do think Sonic was rushed compared to the rest of the cast, which might explain why he just shows up in the story last minute. I also believe his moveset suffered because of this. Does his side B have to be a faster version of his down B? I think Sakurai doesn't like doing drastic move changes for characters once they're established, hence why Sonic pretty much remained the same up until Ultimate. They removed some of the ball moves and added extra flair to his current ones, but it's mostly just aesthetic. His B moves remain the same. One of the best parts of Snake's inclusion is that he has a secret Kodak taunt on his stage, which has him bantering about all the characters in the roster along with his opinions on them, which is just too perfect. It's pretty rare, but having two unrelated guests being able to have a little interaction is pretty cool to see.
Nope, just don't like it.
Smash Wii U and 3DS included even more fan-requested characters while removing one. In the reveal for the fourth Smash, Capcom's Mega Man was shown. It was his classic series appearance, which is the most iconic. His proportions and movement were meant to mimic his NES sprite, and I think it works well. His idle stance makes him seem like he's suspicious of his opponent with that strong side eye. Having at least one move from each numbered entry of Mega Man 1 through 8 was a great idea. All of his B attacks are from Mega Man 2, but his custom moves, remember those, were from different entries and made him a completely different character. His final smash having the other Mega Mans was just the cherry on top. Later, one of the most iconic video game characters ever was revealed, being Pac-Man. Interestingly, he didn't get a full CG trailer like everyone else, only the tail end. Thank God they chose this version of Pac-Man though, and not the Ghostly Adventures one. His moves are a mix of references to his own series and other Namco arcade games like Mappy and Galaga. His alternate colors seem to have some restrictions since it just changes his gloves and boots. I assume Namco didn't want Pac-Man's iconic yellow color to be messed with too much. Pity they didn't give him different hats to give homage to his other games though. They reference Pac-Land so much that you'd think he'd at least have that hat to match his winged boots. Later on, Smash Wii U and 3DS got DLC including even more guests, the first being Ryu from Street Fighter. This was honestly surprising to me since I had assumed that Smash would only ever have one third-party character per company. They never stated that was a rule, that was just my assumption. Ryu plays very differently from anyone else on the roster. He actually plays like a proper fighting game character. If you perform the motion input for his moves, you increase his damage and knockback. He even yells out the move in a different way as an indicator that you performed it right. Tap in and hold in the A button for his normals will change the hit from light to heavy, which gives him more normals than the rest of the cast. They also gave him his focus attack from Street Fighter 4, which works like a counter and can now absorb more than one hit. It acts more like the red focus attack. His side smash, being the donkey kick, looks just as powerful here as it did in Street Fighter 3, something even the other Street Fighter games I feel don't replicate well. The attention to detail was great with Ryu, and there's so many little touches that are so charming. Like perfect blocking, for example, where Ryu has a parry animation and sound effect like from Street Fighter 3. In Smash Ultimate, they even had him lock onto his opponent in 1v1s, just like how a character auto-turns in a 2D fighter. Ryu was a character I had always dreamed would be in Smash, and I even mapped out how the moves would work. I didn't consider the focus attack then, so I assigned the donkey kick as a side B and the hurricane kick as his down B. The moveset here is better than I imagined with having the motion inputs implemented. You'd think that performing these with an analog stick would make them impossible, but it's really not too bad. Thankfully, him auto-turning in Ultimate made it even easier, since changing sides on the fly on the Wii U was a bit tricky. The next character was one of the biggest surprises in the series' history, Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. Cloud appears in a ton of games, but all of these were released by Square. I think Smash, Little Big Planet, and Yokai Watch Wibble Wobble are the only games he's appeared in that weren't put out by Square. I get a feeling his price tag for licensing is high, hence why he might have had to have been DLC and why he only has 2 songs in his stage. Cloud was super fun, and thank God his down B isn't another counter. Instead, he manually charges his limit break, giving a big buff to his movement until you discharge it with a B attack. The limit buff made Cloud a terror in the competitive scene, but in Ultimate this was pared down from being permanent to wearing off after a few seconds. Square, again, is really weird with alternate colors, making them extremely subtle. Thankfully, his Advent Children alternate can make up for not having an atomic green Cloud. The final DLC was Platinum Games' Bayonetta. She was ranked high in the Smash ballot, which was the deciding factor for her inclusion. I'm sure it didn't hurt though that she helped promote Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U as well. People would always say she's too sexy to be included, but I'm glad they were proven wrong. Yes, they did have to censor her moves a bit when using her wicked weaves, but that's not a deal breaker. She's the top dog in this game like Kirby was for 64, Fox for Melee, and Meta Knight for Brawl. She was able to kill extremely fast with her juggles and gave the competitive Smash Wii U scene a bad reputation. I think she's fun, and since I'm not a competitive player, I lose with her all the same despite her being my main in Wii U. Funny coincidence that the character action game guests always seem to be top tier. Smash Ultimate already set expectations into the heavens by including all past characters, but for me, I was pretty happy with the launch roster as is. I pretty much had everyone I wanted. Sure, I'd love Ryu Hayabusa or Jill Valentine, but anyone else at this point was just a bonus to me. Snake was back for crying out loud. Bayonetta can go in the bin now that he's here. Snake was the first character shown in the reveal trailer to represent that everyone is here. Snake has had 2 monumental reveals, and not many guests can claim that. Although I think it's interesting his symbol changed from Foxhound to an exclamation point. I guess that was a Konami mandate, since there's still some bad blood with Kojima perhaps. The launch roster added 2 new Konami guests, Simon and Richter Belmont. Richter was an Echo Fighter, meaning he's essentially the exact same. No shade to Simon, but I think everyone gravitated towards choosing Richter. For Simon, I'm really glad they went for his Conan the Barbarian look as opposed to his more anime Bishi one. He had this Conan look in the box art, and even his sprites more closely resembled that. Belmont was another character I had dreamed about being included. though I never have thought to have his up special be his uppercut from Symphony of the Night while he holds the knife sub-weapon. Their recovery is dog shit, but they make up for it by being able to control space with their zoning attacks really well. Hitting enemies with that whip is so satisfying. I do wish the idle A attack was a side A like how it works for Mega Man shots. I think that would be more faithful to the NES game since you're doing that same attack standing still and while moving in Castlevania. Just a minor nitpick though. They at least gave him the move where you can wiggle the whip if you hold A. The last guest fighter included in the launch roster was Ken from Street Fighter. Unlike Ryu, Ken got a cinematic trailer and got his ass beat to spotlight the new Pokemon edition in Cineroar. Ken was also one of the few characters actually leaked. I don't consider him an Echo Fighter since he's very different from Ryu. Sure, he has the same moves on paper, but the damage and properties couldn't be more different. I remember people not being surprised at his inclusion even without the leak, and I'm not sure why. We didn't know we would get another Street Fighter rep at all, let alone it being Ken. I personally would have bet on it being Chun-Li or even Akuma. Perhaps I'm underestimating Ken's popularity. I do think most of the guests in Ultimate had to be DLC to potentially mitigate the licensing costs of said character, hence why a majority of the DLC were guests, starting with Joker from Persona 5. I never thought a Persona character would be rolling up in Smash, and this is one of the most surprising inclusions to me. Joker can receive a buff on his B moves that uses his persona after some time. I believe it's a combo of damage dealt and received like Little Mac with his KO punch. Unlike their competitor, Joker is allowed to have different colors even for his school alt. His stage Mementos changes its visual theme to Persona 3, 4, and 5 depending on the song that's being played. That's pretty awesome. I think it would have been more suitable to only have one move use as main Persona Agni and have others representing different personas, but I get that's a lot of new models for just one move. Following Joker, you had another RPG series represented, being the hero from various Dragon Quests. I'm sure these four all have canon names, but they're all just called Hero here, with the one from the most recent entry at the time, Dragon Quest XI, being considered the main hero. The others are from Dragon Quest 3, 4, and 8. 3 and 4 are particularly famous ones in Japan, and 8 is the most popular in Western countries. I'm surprised that they don't have the guy from the first game. I know Dragon Quest 3's Erdrick is more popular and fills that classic Dragon Quest role, but it would've been cool to see regardless since he's from the first game after all. People were freaking out on how this character was mostly RNG with his down B special, which would cause a menu to pop up and you could choose one of the 4 moves that randomly appears. Using any of these moves would use MP from a bar that regenerates over time. Some of these are extremely situational, while others you can kill someone almost instantly, put foes to sleep, allow you to recover from anywhere, or heal. Some moves are purely meant to troll you, like just having you blow up. I do wish the slime was implemented in more than just a taunt, but I'm glad he's here in some way at least. Announced alongside Hero was Banjo and Kazooie, whom I suppose is now a guest since Nintendo no longer has any ownership of him. It was rad seeing the new owners, Microsoft, work with Nintendo to have Banjo here. He plays the most straightforward out of all the DLC, his main gimmick being the Wonder Wing, a powerful tackle that he can only do so many times before he's KO'd. At least Microsoft is letting someone make a game with Banjo since they themselves have no interest in doing so. The last guest in the first season I constantly heard referred to as Ness's dad or buff Pokemon trainer is Terry. I never thought another proper fighting game character would be included, least of all one from SNK. I just assumed it was too niche and Nintendo would never even bother asking, but I'm glad I was wrong. It was leaked early that an SNK character would be coming, but it wasn't specified who. Everyone pretty much suspected it would be Terry. Not knowing who the rep was for sure though added to him having one of the best reveal trailers, seeing all the different SNK fighters try to get the Smash invite just to be denied one by one. Nakaruru, you need to try harder next time. Terry had similar gimmicks to Ryu, locking on their opponent in 1v1s and having motion inputs, but Terry was a bit more interesting. He had 2 different side specials, and depending on which side you were facing the opponent, back B would do a crack shot, and forward B would be burn knuckle. His up B was rising tackle, but holding down for a short time and then up B would increase the damage, this being the only charge input in the game. Whenever Terry reached a certain percentage of damage, he could do his 2 super combos with slightly more advanced motion inputs. This was like having Little Mac's KO meter full except at all times. He could do it infinitely too, since this was referencing his ability to do the same in Fatal Fury Wheel Bout. This ability would only go away if you KO'd him. Terry stage had the most music included for any DLC character from all kinds of SNK titles, not just fighters. I honestly think SNK was just happy to be here. Like every character, I remember people being mad at his inclusion since no one really knew who he was. But that's like the point of guess in crossover games, yeah? If I don't know who someone is, I want to learn more about them to be able to better appreciate their inclusion in a game like Smash. Growing up, I didn't know who most of the Marvel side was in the Versus games. I didn't learn about them until I was interested in reading their comics since I liked who they were in the fighters I'd see them in. Games don't have to be centered around your tastes. If one guy in a game of 80 isn't someone you know, maybe go a little outside your comfort zone. The first guest in the second and final season was one of the most infamous, being Steve from Minecraft. He had alts that made him different characters such as Alex, Zombie, and Enderman, but they're all just essentially costumes. I never thought I'd hear the Smash announcer ever say zombie.
Zombie!
Mr. Minecraft here is considered top tier in Ultimate. He can just do shit that the main roster can't deal with, like making his own platforms and walls by mining for materials and crafting as he fights. The materials you get are dependent on the stage too. If the crafting table gets destroyed or you just want to move it, you can quickly pop it to your location instantly. The blocks don't last forever though, they're timed as to help balance him out. In spite of that, he's still a terror in the competitive scene. Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII followed after. It's always good having more villains, and this one was special since he was the first third-party one, unless we count Enderman or whatever. Sephiroth seemed to be a backdoor way of including more Final Fantasy VII music and giving Cloud some spirits beyond his default Smash render. Perhaps Sephiroth was meant to offset the licensing costs of the additions for Cloud. Sephiroth was accessible early if you beat him in the Sephiroth challenge. This was an amazing idea I wish was done again, especially in other games. I was happy when Cloud's down special wasn't a counter, since that move seems to be a crutch for anime sword folks, but Sephiroth sadly had another one of these. I do love the dynamic of his moves being super scary to get hit with. Whether it's the anxiety from his side specials circling around his foes or his huge explosion projectile, he really does feel like a boss character. His final smash replicating his meteor attack from Final Fantasy even gives you status ailments. Sephiroth was a great inclusion just for the fact of having more than 2 Final Fantasy VII songs added. A character I lost my mind for, but I feel like no one else really did, was Kazuya from Tekken. Namco developed this game, so it's surprising it took this long for another company inclusion beyond Pac-Man. Kazuya is one of my favorite characters in the genre, and he was the best possible choice as the Tekken rep. Some false prophet said Heihachi would be better, and that old bastard already got his chance in PS All-Stars. Just for appearing in All-Stars, he's blacklisted from Smash as far as I'm concerned. Besides, Heihachi's a guest in other shit too. Let an actual cool character get a shot like Kazuya. Some would also argue it should have been Jin, and yeah, he is cool, but what moveset would he use? His Tekken 4 karate style became the standard, but his old moves from Tekken 3 have been available through Devil Jin since Tekken 5. Would his B attacks just be in Devil Jin style and his A attacks be in his normal karate style? Kazuya, they got him figured out already. Regardless, Kazuya has been around since the first game and acts as one of the main antagonists. Jin got to be in Brawlhalla, which is just as good anyways, right? Kazuya has a huge moveset like a proper Tekken character should. He's able to do electrics, and that has never been easier than in Smash. Kaz can also use diagonal inputs for certain moves, and even his taunt is a usable attack. He's a powerhouse and essentially is a viable Ganondorf. Sorry Ganondorf mains. I just love overwhelming fools with him, and it's so satisfying landing his side smash. I didn't think anyone could compete with Snake in terms of characters I wanted to main, but here we are. The final DLC character and final guest was thought to be impossible, being the dude from Dark Souls, Kingdom Hearts. Sora was apparently the character with the most votes on the Smash ballot for Wii U, and he barely appears in other games also made by Square. This is because Disney has partial ownership. Not sure how much, but enough to keep him from appearing in games willy-nilly. With the exception of Sora's Mickey keychain, all Disney references are gone in his character design. That's fine, since it keeps Smash pure by not having references to non-gaming characters. Sora is one of the lightest characters in the game who can essentially recover from anywhere, making him the definition of floaty. It's unfortunate they couldn't resist giving him a counter as his down B though. I would be blown away if Sora was ever in another Smash again. Everyone else I can buy, but Sora, that's a tough one. I think he could have only been DLC to work here, but let's hope I'm wrong. I'm not one of those people that think the whole Smash roster can't come back again. The "everyone is here" slogan is great, but saying there's 100 characters in this game is better. Sora alone gives me doubt that the whole cast will return, but it was great to see him in Ultimate at least. These guests set the bar impossibly high for whatever the next Smash is. Only time will tell if they can get him back all together again, or if some of these are one and dones. A free-to-play competitor to Smash, Brawlhalla goes insane with guests too. I don't know what it is with platform fighters where companies just decide to put in as many as possible. Brawlhalla has people from movies like Kung Fu Panda, video games like Tomb Raider, shows like Ben 10, comics like Hellboy, it just goes on and on. We have WWE wrestlers, Street Fighter, Tekken, Ninja Turtles, even guests we talked about already like Negan. Master Chief and Arbiter are playable even in the Switch and PlayStation versions. Also, Master Chief can be in Brawlhalla, but not DOA or KI. Perhaps it's because it's more cartoony, Microsoft doesn't care as much. Or IP awareness for Chief is at an all-time low, so they'll say yes to anything. If you ever want to see SpongeBob vs. Mega Man, then here's your game. That being said, these aren't really guest characters, they're more so costumes since their movesets are just copied from the main roster and mixed around a little. The only two true guests are Rayman and Ezio since they have their own unique moves. Some of these guests get to have a move or two that's unique to them, but that's far and few in between. These characters can be tried out for free in the training mode, which is very generous, but the price to buy and keep them is insane. You have to buy Mammoth coins, which the lowest tier is $6 for 140 coins. Crossover characters cost $300, so either spend $12 for one or $13 for the next increment, which is $340. That's very expensive. Also, some of these prices are very different. Say I want Mega Man who's 400 coins, the minimum I have to pay is $20 for 540 coins. $20 for a fully fledged character is insane, and this is just essentially a costume. God damn, Brawlhalla. Gotta be real, I had no idea a LEGO platform fighter existed until now. LEGO Brawl is a mix of generic LEGO themes and the ones the company owns like Ninja Go. The one property that's in the roster are the Jurassic Park characters. It's a good amount of them too, from both Jurassic Park and World. There is no dinosaurs playable sadly, you're stuck with a dude who died from the tar-spitting dino. But at least you can finally play as John Hammond in a fighting game. I'm hard-pressed to call all these guys characters though, since the whole roster is just glorified costumes. You can mix and match appearances and even movesets all you want, so there's nothing that makes any character unique. There's 2 Jurassic Park themed movesets, but even if they were locked to the Jurassic Park characters, the moves are so limited and basic anyways. It makes no difference whether they have a stun rod or the cane with the amber. I'm surprised there's not more licensed IPs, but perhaps everyone just said no. Or maybe Jurassic Park is just the most affordable one they could get as opposed to dealing with the likes of Disney for Marvel or Star Wars characters. Alright, let's go through some grab bags here. Shovel Knight isn't a lot of fighters, but has only been an actual proper guest in a select few. Blade Strangers is a crossover, so the argument could be made he's just another dude in a game full of characters from other indie games. However, Shovel Knight, Gunvolt, and Isaac are not owned by Nicholas like most of the characters included. Isaac out of context is disturbing since you're essentially beating up a traumatized naked child at the end of the day. His face in Blade Stranger seems more emotionally determined than he does in his own game. Gunvolt I've just known as the not Mega Man, but this guy has his own vibe and has a cool anime protag look. He gives off the energy of a more youthful, sleeker Zero. Shovel Knight himself is a bit taller than I normally expect, also with a much deeper voice than the one I pictured in my head. Even though he's not his short self, I do like that Blade Strangers made Shovel Knight into more of their own thing. Another Shovel Knight example is Rivals of Aether, where he's joined by Ori and Sign from Ori and the Blind Forest. It's cool seeing Ori with a more retro sprite. Shovel Knight himself has a moveset where he's able to buy moves on the fly mid-battle, which is a really cool idea representing a good portion of his arsenal. I'm glad Rivals of Aether had some restraint not to go nuts with guests, since I'm sure they could have. I just assume it takes a lot of time to make just one character, which might factor in why there's only 2. Either way, this lets their roster shine on its own. It is odd Shovel Knight in particular isn't on the Xbox version specifically. It looks like they didn't see it as viable to update that version, which seems odd to have all the DLC available except him. The sequel, which uses 3D models, has yet to include any guests from what I've seen. I assume that's a choice they made on purpose. Indie fighters a lot of the time will include other indie games as their guests. A lot of these devs are pals with one another, so I'm sure it's pretty easy to just ask each other. A game like Mighty Fight Federation will use characters from older games that are more niche, like ToeJam and Earl or Kunio and Riki from River City Ransom. They also had indie game characters too, with Yooka-Laylee and Miriam from Bloodstained. Miriam does have a weird animation where at the end of her string it looks like she slips and falls. Maybe this is how it happens in Bloodstained, but to me it just looks like she fell on her ass. This chick does need to be in more fighters though, just look at her, dude. Retro characters like what Fight Federation does, I'm also gonna have to assume are easier and cheaper to get, since it's not like their IP is being used otherwise. ToeJam and Earl might be easier to get from Sega than Sonic the Hedgehog. If it wasn't, then you'd be out of your mind to think ToeJam and Earl would be included over Sonic. Another indie fighter brave enough to not have Shovel Knight was Dive Kick. We could potentially say the Boz is a guest. Coincidentally, he's also in Shovel Knight Showdown. He was initially a scrap Street Fighter character, and some YouTube funny men got him to be in a few games once the ancient tomb of his existence was uncovered. On Twitter, the Dive Kick account replied to some dude regarding Saints Row 3, and the Saints Row account just straight up said Johnny Got should be in Dive Kick. Later, in a free update, there he was. Saints Row is a goofy-ass game that's a spoof of GTA, and Dive Kick's casts are full of FGC spoofs themselves, making Johnny fit right in. Later, the fencer from the indie game Nidhogg was added. In that game, dive kicks were pretty essential, so his inclusion makes sense here. In his super, if you go to the other side of the stage, you can win the match by getting eaten by the Nidhogg. Let's just be grateful they didn't use the Nidhogg 2 characters, yeah? Rivals of Aether wasn't the only platform indie fighter around, but most others seemed to be a crossover among multiple indie games, while Rivals just had a couple. Brawlout's roster was mostly original characters. They did include 4 guests though from other indie titles, being Juan from Guacamelee, the Drifter from Hyper Light Drifter, Yuka and Lele, and the headless dude you play as in Dead Cells named Dead Cells. That's the one game I'm actually familiar with here, and the animations are great. His attacks feel similar to his game, and the animations they created seem like a proper extension of his moveset, if that makes sense. Wrestling games and games like it usually go the celebrity route. Bruce Lee and Mike Tyson can fight each other in the octagon in a couple of UFC games. Little Mac from Punch-Out is in Fight Night for GameCube, even though it looks more like the version of him in Super Punch-Out. Also, Mac looks like he got beat up in a couple of matches already. WWF Warzone had Turok from the shooter series of the same name, but he wasn't actually playable officially. He can only be accessed using a cheat device or by hacking the game, and he has the same moveset as The Rock. I guess they didn't get permission to include him. Both Turok and WWF Warzone being made by Iguana contributed to the potential inclusion, but perhaps WWF themselves shut it down, or there wasn't enough time to flesh him out. Fred Durst has appeared in a WWE game along with the Fight Club game. In that, he can square up with Abraham Lincoln. Finally, WWE 2K16 as a pre-order bonus had the Terminator with the ones from the first and second film as separate characters. They even did a special trailer where Schwarzenegger is recreating the bar scene in 2, but now with the wrestlers as the extras, ended on him about to steal Dean Ambrose's clothes. Couldn't help but notice that the camera is panned up a bit higher in this trailer than in the OG film. Father Time will come for us all, I suppose. His intro plays a theme from 2 for both characters, and it's just goofy seeing this dude walk out into the ring. He isn't really the Terminator, in my opinion. It's Arnold acting like the Terminator, if that makes sense. Sometimes he doesn't sell hits, which is very Terminator, but in others he's in agonizing pain, which is very out of character. Both Terminators in Mortal Kombat react too, but that's usually just for fatalities. Mostly a nitpick, but what isn't is how you get the Terminator. He was a pre-order bonus and was available in the in-game store later. This game with the DLC has been taken down, so if you missed it, then unfortunately you've missed it forever. I was lucky enough to be able to get a Steam code with all the DLC included, which despite it being a digital code, do run out and eventually expire. The cons of having a yearly franchise, I guess. Having presidents in a game was a fad for a while. I think game studios knew using them wouldn't warrant legal action despite it being their likeness. Bill and Hillary Clinton are playable and ready to rumble boxing. They aren't called Bill and Hillary Clinton though, but rather Mr. President and First Lady. Maybe it's allowed if they don't straight up say the names. I guess they could be anybody. Celebrities they did get permission for was the main guy from Shaq, along with Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was already involved in a bunch of Sega stuff, so I'm sure he directly asked to be added. Between Mr. T, Mike Tyson, and Bad Bunny, these celebrity guests are cute and all, but not something I'm ever gonna lose my mind over no matter who it is. The ideal celeb guest would be when a real person plays a character, Norimaru and Akira Toriyama being the perfect examples. They're playing a characterized version of themselves. If like The Rock was added to Fatal Fury, I'd be cooler with that, since The Rock is a character, so to speak, played by Dwayne Johnson. I'd still prefer a fully fictional character though. One wrestling game that had guests that caught my eye was All Japan Pro Wrestling on the Sega Saturn with the subtitle featuring Virtua. The Virtua in question were Wolf Hockfield and Jeffrey McWild from the Virtua Fighter series. I can't think of more fitting guests for a wrestling game. The sequel on the Dreamcast brought them back and added Kage, who's not a wrestler, but being a masked ninja, he's surprisingly not out of place. In the third game, Jeffrey and Kage were strangely cut, leaving just the lone wolf. I'm sure it's not coincidence, but the wrestler Jim Steele, who based his persona off of Wolf, is in the roster as well, so it's pretty cool getting to have them face off. I want to see this kind of thing more. Put King or Zangief in the next WWE 2K game. I'd buy a wrestling game in a heartbeat if they did that. The closest we got after this was Johnny Cage in WWE Immortals, which was made by NRS. But it's a mobile game, which I'm not touching mobile games in this vid, so forget I even said anything. Ryu and Chun-Li appeared as Rangers, and Power Rangers battled for the grid. They played more like their hyper fighting versions, where they move much quicker and have beam supers like in the Marvel vs. series. They don't have their default outfits you'd be most familiar with, but rather are dressed like in-universe Power Rangers instead, donning the Ranger gear and an alt that made them look like they went to high school in that world. They even had unique story mode segments. It was awesome to have these two included, and it helped that their assets were able to be pulled from the mobile game. Ryu alone has crossed over with so many games, fighting game or not. Take Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation, a Japanese-only web browser game. This was a crossover game between Capcom and a grab bag of manga companies. Even though this was a crossover title, one character did break the theme, being none other than Barack Obama, who was a DLC guest added in a Valentine's update. After fighting the American president, Ryu squared up with American Dad and Family Guy characters in a US-only web browser game called American Dad vs. Family. In it, Ryu acted as the final boss, with his stage weirdly being Sagat's from Street Fighter 2. Urgai's God Bless the Ring was a 3D fighter made by Square, and most of the cast was original to Urgai's, with the exception of Cloud and Tifa, who were playable after waiting 1 and 2 months respectively in real time for them to unlock on the arcade machine. In the PlayStation port though, they're just here straight up along with Sephiroth. Unlockable characters in the PS1 version included Yuffie, Zack, and Vincent. The final boss of the game, Django, looks like Red 13, so I'm surprised they didn't give him a palette swap just to include Red 2. There's so many Final Fantasy guests, I don't even know if this is a guest appearance at this point and not just a full-blown crossover. Ain't no one picking this game up to play as God Hand over Cloud. He could fight with and without his Buster Sword on the fly. He also had a meteor projectile that he could just whip out whenever, which made him pretty OP. Tifa played like a Lost Tekken character with her wave dash-and-like movement. Vincent takes that a step further and just straight up has Mishima moves. This game is great and the closest we've got to having Cloud in a traditional fighter. After Urgai's, it's just platform and arena fighters for him. Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climax is an anime crossover that had all the stages themed from different Sega games. Since this was also made by Sega, they were able to put into their own characters into the mix, being Akira from Virtua Fighter and Savaria Bless from Valkyria Chronicles. It's cool seeing Akira playable in a 2D game, and I think this might be the first time that's the case. This one doesn't count. Valkyria Chronicles I'm not too familiar with, but it's a tactical RPG and this girl seems to be an antagonist in the series. I just know that she's my main since I can spam the hell out of her projectiles with little consequence. These guests just make me wish there was a 2D Sega vs. Sega fighter that had the same sprite quality. Okay, it's gonna get a little messy here, folks. Melty Blood's guests I would define as being outside of the Melty Blood and Tsukehime universes. The first I've seen is Ryogi Shiki, who's the main character of Kara no Kyokai or Boundary of Emptiness or Garden of Sinners. She debuted as a hidden unplayable boss in Melty Blood Actress Again, and later became playable in an updated version of Actress Again Current Code. You get all that? Saber from the Fate series has ties with so many light novels, it's not even funny. She appears as a guest in Melty Blood type Lumina, along with Count Monte Cristo, Mash Knight, and Ushiwakara Maru, who were more Fate characters that were added as post-launch DLC. Saber was also in a visual novel crossover called Nitro plus Blaster's Infinite Duel. Saber is also from a visual novel like most of the cast, but her series is not made by the same company as those in this game. Nitro Plus did have other characters from outside that bubble though. Heart from Arcana Hearts appears again, as well as Hamura from Senran Kagura. I'm surprised Senran Kagura doesn't have a dedicated fighting game. I feel like they experiment with genres all the time, and their characters would fit in a fighter seamlessly. I guess they just have to rely on these guest appearances, which doesn't seem to happen too often. Is it obvious I don't have much to say about these two? I mentioned Onimusha Blade Warriors earlier with its guest Mega Man and Zero, that pair being an intercompany crossover with two Capcom IPs. Another one of these was with the more chaotic platform fighter Beautiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, this time featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series. This released on the GameCube and PSP only, but Dante was only on the PSP one. I suppose this was because Devil May Cry was a PlayStation series and stayed exclusive on the console for years. Both being series created by Hideki Kamiya, Dante was playable in the first Beautiful Joe, and I assume his ties from that brought him over to the PSP version of the fighter. His alts are different characters, being his dad Sparta and an enemy from the first game called Plasma. They did add other DMC alts for some Beautiful Joe characters, but those are just costumes since the way they play is the exact same. Dante is the only one who plays unique. I do think it's cute this crossover is canonized a bit in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as well.
It's alright, Joe. Be cool. It's stylish versus beautiful. Okay then. Ready?
Giant monster fighters are something that should happen more often. There's tons of character archetypes to work off of and lots of fun ideas for guests if implemented well. Cyberbots from Capcom had Mecha Goki as mentioned earlier, but in its spiritual sequel Tech Romancer, they included Jin Satome with his mech Blodia. It's cool to see Blodia in a 3D fighter, and I guess he's a bit of a stubster compared to the rest of the cast. Override 2, Super Mech League, a giant mech fighter, implemented DLC including 4 Ultraman characters. Ultraman was very busy that year and also went over to the giant monster brawler Gigabash. We have 5 Ultraman characters in total, but only one of which is actually a monster. I've never seen Ultraman, so I don't know if these are like different eras of the character or completely separate dudes in each, but I would have liked to have seen more monsters from the series. One of the Ultramen looks freaky as hell. His neck is super stretched out and he's so skinny. This one is from a Netflix movie, so maybe if I saw that, I'd appreciate this appearance more. With these Ultraman characters, I think the rights holder might have been the most strict I've ever seen on alternate colors. Did you notice it? The real star of this show is Old Daddy Zilla. We have that variety I was looking for here, with 90s Godzilla as the headliner. There's also Buzzsaw Crush Monster Gigan. Also Mechagodzilla 3, who goes by Kiryu, as well as my personal fave, Destoroyah. An additional pack including Ghidorah and Hedorah was added later too. Hedorah is my favorite out-of-pocket pick. Get an obscure baddie in a film that's not even well-liked is something I live for. Hedorah is here to tell y'all not to pollute people. They handled these characters so perfectly and gave cheeky references to past films like Godzilla's famous dropkick. Gigabash added 2 original characters that look really similar to Power Rangers Megazord and Goldar. I wonder if they were originally meant to be that but then had to be repurposed. It's too bad Power Rangers proper wasn't included in some way, but them getting Ultraman and Godzilla on top of having well-designed original characters is still an incredible feat. Maybe we'll get Babe Ruthless in another fighter. Iron Saga might be the most recent entry here. This seems to be a Japanese indie game using 2D sprites and a giant mecha fighter. It's a fighting game spin-off of a Chinese mobile game called Battle Mecha Iron Saga and is borderline a crossover title since 7 of the 12 initial fighters are from the mobile game. The other 5 are guests and there's 2 more to come as DLC. Mazinger Z, Great Mazinger, and Boss Borat from the Mazinger series are included in the roster, along with Getter Robot and Dan Kuga. I don't know the words I just said. I hear this game called Super Robot Wars the Fighter, but that would imply that this game has things like Ultraman and Gundam in it, not just Mazinger. These are a bit more older and obscure mecha from what I can understand. I figure since Mazinger is probably the most recognizable name here, that's why it has 3 reps from that series. I've heard of Mazinger, but I'm not familiar with the others like Geta Robot and Dan Kuga. The 2 DLC guests are Shin Geta Robot, which I assume is a more recent version of this guy, in addition to Zio Reimer, who's from a series that isn't represented in the roster yet. This fighter is fun and it's cool, essentially half the roster are guests, but I assume most people aren't going to be in the loop on that, hence why this release might have flown under your radar. I do recommend it, all that being said. Whoa, hey, Babe Ruthless from the future again. Shin Geta Robo is now playable as of the time of me editing this. Now, I could have just ignored his release and pretended like it was too late to include him, but here we are. He's cool, I guess. He seems like a more fit version of Geta Robo. The non-Shin version seems more rotund. Anyways, this interruption sure was worth it, huh? Back to the past me. The poor, sorry version that has yet to play a Shin Geta Robo. What a pitiful bastard. Everybody just laugh at her. I gotta stop editing at 4 AM. Pocket Bravery was able to snag Sho Kamui from the Breaker series. This dude hasn't been in a game in over 2 decades, and here he is in this indie game. He matches the style of Pocket Bravery being in a chibi style, along with the characters from the series in the background. You do have to put some effort to unlock him by doing 3 different supers in arcade mode, thankfully nothing too hard. Since Pocket Bravery was made by Statera, they added Rick Johnson from their game Runs and Guns as DLC. As of right now, he's only available on the Steam version. The PS5 version came out after he was released on Steam, but he's not in the base roster or purchasable as DLC, which is a little confusing and wasn't day and date. Let's get historical with the first Dynasty Warriors, which is a series that started off as a fighter. Dynasty Warriors is a series following fictionalized versions of Chinese figures from the story of the 3 kingdoms. With the guests being Nobunaga Oda and Hideyoshi Toyotomi, these historical Japanese figures stand out a bit. It's like the equivalent of having a fighter about the French Revolution, and one of the characters is Kongmi. To play as these 2, you have to beat the game with most of the characters and enter a cheat code on the character select after. Don't know where you were supposed to find this code if you didn't have the internet. This pair of Japanese historical figures would eventually get their own series called Samurai Warriors, which is the Japanese equivalent to Dynasty Warriors, making it kind of funny that this was their first appearance in the Koei universe. What else we got here? Power Instinct Matra Melee Japanese arcade versions has 4 Rage of the Dragons characters. Rage of the Dragons was supposed to be a double dragon fighting game, but instead it's a legally distinct one. For example, Jimmy Lee is Jimmy Lewis here. These 4 characters were cut in the PS2 version though. Instead, you have a hidden boss character, Bobby Strong, based on the real-life comedian Bobby Ologun. Now, here's a case where a real-life person is playing a character, though barely. He's still obviously this real-life comedian. If this were a game made today and this person did something really bad in real life, is Bobby Strong's character separate enough for him to stay in the game? My assumption is no. That being said, let's take a peek at that wiki and where this guy is at now. Oh shit, not again. Now we're getting as indie as it gets here. Duels of Fortune is an early access fighter on PC that has an incredibly charming art style. We have 2 guests from other indie games. The first is Ember from Hyper Team Recon. Ember has a similar case to The Apprentice in Soul Calibur 4 where her game isn't even out yet, but at least she has a name though. Hyper Team Recon does look awesome. It has a Paper Mario style and there's a demo available on Steam. I swear this isn't an ad. In that game, Ember can copy the appearance and abilities of other people, and she can do a bit of that here too with whoever her opponent is. Red goo seems to be her theme as she can throw it as a projectile or do a Sonic-esque spin dash. The other guest is Mystery Johnson from the indie fighter Schwarzer Blitz. I assume perhaps he's inspired by Dick Tracy. Johnson is from a 3D fighter with very different mechanics, but some of those elements are implemented here. For example, he has a system called Triggers where he has 6 bullets that allows him to chain attacks that wouldn't combo normally, making him more a combo-heavy aggressive character. I suppose the best comparison is Roman canceling in Guilty Gear. In the game Schwarzer Blitz itself, they had a little guest exchange between Duel of Fortune with Sir Rattlebones, who I feel might be inspired from Sir Daniel from Medieval, except this guy's far more polite. He has a lot of moves from Duel of Fortune like his shield charge, which looks super impactful here, as well as his overhead axe throw and low head throw. I don't know why, but I just love this dude's taunt. Rattlebone has a funny ult where he's serving up a brick oven ass whoopin'. The devs of Schwarzer Blitz also made Explosion Judo Federation, which also includes a Duels of Fate character being the legless robot Caloman. He's now dressed in a gi to fit the judo theme just like the rest of the cast. Him being a grappler I figure factors into why he was picked, since the style of judo itself is very grapple focused. I reached out to the developer of Schwarzer Blitz and Explosion Judo, Andrea Demetrio, to give me more insight on these guests and how they were even included. These inclusions were apparently planned for a while. Andrea was one of the beta testers of Duel of Fortune, and his main was Sir Rattlebone, hence why the polite skeleton was chosen for Schwarzer Blitz. Andrea added that Rattlebone helped round out the cast since he had a unique playstyle compared to everyone else. Mystery Johnson was chosen by the Duel of Fortune devs simply because he was the symbol of the series. Both devs even added moves to each other's characters that would then get added to their moves in their home games. For Calaman getting added, it was simply just a matter of asking, and the devs told him, sure, go for it, making it sound like there's a lot less red tape involved. I asked if there were any time limit to these collabs, or if a new deal had to be made if an updated version was ported to consoles. Andrew told me that since there wasn't a formal contract, the agreement was on a time unlimited license with no real termination provisions. When actually making these characters, both parties would review each other's animations and help write each other's win quotes. I find this process fascinating, and I am grateful to the detailed insight Andrea provided. It's cool when indie games like this can just do a little character swap in their games. I am making assumptions here, but I feel like Andrea's case of how indie guests are exchanged isn't too uncommon. Unlike the other games we've discussed where contracts were signed and money exchanged, I just kinda picture the deal for these guests was simply these respective devs chatting casually and thinking it'd be cool to put these guys in. I really recommend checking these games out. They're free and work perfectly on Steam Deck too, so what's there to lose? Combat Core, an indie fighter that plays similar to Power Stone. One guest is Ares from the indie 2D platform shooter Ares Extinction Agenda. This fighter's version is much taller than Ares' chibi-like sprite from his own game. This is another case where I don't want to be too disingenuous where I act like I can break down Ares' movesets and pull potential references from their games, but let me try anyways. So in Combat Core, Ares shoots his gun, which is a reference to him shooting his gun in Ares Extinction Agenda. That wasn't so hard. The other two guests are Zeto and Kazuna from a 2011 animated Flash series called Terrain of Magical Expertise, or TOME for short. TOME is a web series that later got a video game adaptation that takes place in an online world kinda like Dot Hack or Sword Art Online. In the lore of the series, Zeto and Kazuna are the creators of that world and are the series' main antagonists. Looks like these guys are in a couple of games, one of which looks like it's inspired from Mega Man Battle Network. All three guest characters have a cel-shaded art style, which is fitting for the guys from TOME and seems to work for Ares despite his game looking a bit more gritty and mechanical. Quick one here with Data East Suiku Enbu Fuinsaiki, also known as Dark Legend, a fighting game based on medieval Chinese myths. Data East used their own guy from Fighter's History, main guy Makoto Mizoguchi. Dude makes more guest appearances than I thought. The Saturn version added one more character from Fighter's History, Liu Youngmie. This game moves hella fast, and these guys are zipping around like a Marvel vs. game. Other than that though, these characters are pretty straightforward additions. This wasn't intended to be an iceberg video, but if it was, we're at the deep dark bottom now. Rakugaki Showtime, a PS1 arena fighter that only released in Japan, had Mischief Maker's Marina Light Years as a guest in this party fighter. Marina's actual game was an N64 exclusive, and this fighter was only on PS1, so I imagine most people just assumed that she was part of the main cast. This was the character's last appearance in anything, sadly, since Mischief Makers hasn't returned in any form since. Let's go on a bit of a rapid fire here. There was a Chinese ripoff of KOF 13 called Shuando Zhuwang, or King of Combat. This Tencent published game isn't just similar to KOF 13, it's straight up a ripoff, down to even the animations. This game was only available in China, and it's essentially unplayable now. For whatever reason though, SNK was cool with this game somehow. They allowed Terry Bogard and Benimaru to be playable. The sprites look similar to KOF 13, but these seem to be new ones for the SNK pair. Perhaps the KOF sprites were traced over, much like how the animation for the game's original characters appear to be as well. But I'm sorry, why did they pick Benimaru? Of all the characters, he just seems like a dark horse pick. Highly recommend the video from Ignat Rizzi, who goes over this oddity cause god damn I never would have known this existed, and he does an excellent job going over what this game actually is. His video also goes over the fact that Terry and Benimaru were removed from the game in later updates. Fighter Maker! Jesus, does this game even count? Who knows? Skullomania is a preset character in this entry where you have to design your own mediocre fighter. Skullomania has all of his moves, but he seems to be much slower. I just think that's the game itself though. He also doesn't have any voice clips either, it's just silence, which isn't very in character. Does anyone on Earth have a save file of them making a decent fighting game exclusively using this game engine? Is Anarchy Reigns a fighting game? Who cares, cause it has Bayonetta. She was a pre-order bonus character only for a long time, but eventually became purchasable as DLC. She's joined by Jack Kamen from the Wii exclusive Mad World, now in color. But since Jack isn't the only Mad World character, it has me debating if those guys are less so guests and more so a backdoor sequel to Mad World. Regardless, Bayonetta counts and she plays pretty similar to her own game, although her sauce is toned down a tad here. Bayonetta 1 was pretty fresh in people's minds at this time, and I'm sure Sega and Platinum Games were happy to toss her in if it meant selling a few more copies. Keyword being a few more since this game didn't perform all too well. It's a shame though, since it's pretty fun and had a lot of interesting ideas. Lost Saga was a free-to-play beat-em-up fighting game hybrid. It's no longer available as far as I've seen, but it had Guilty Gear and BlazBlue characters, making this the only game where those characters could fight each other. Although, it's hard for me to say if these are actually BlazBlue and Guilty Gear characters, or more so the Lost Saga characters dressed up as them. There's not even a lot of footage or evidence of this DLC online. From the footage I was able to find, the characters don't seem to have a lot of unique moves from those fighters either. I just hope the one Lost Saga fan out there is able to help clear this up. Windy X Wyndham, Windy Cross Wyndham? Or maybe the X is silent and it's Windy Wyndham. Either way, this game is a 2D DS fighter with two characters named Izuna and Shino. These guys are from the game The Unemployed Ninja, a dungeon crawler also for the DS, and both this and Windy X Wyndham are made by the devs Ninja. These two seem like great buddies. Fight of Gods, you know, the one where Jesus can fight Santa, has a secret character named Lamia. She's not actually a god from what I've seen, but from a card game called Lamia's Game Room. Both of these games are made by Digital Crafter, the same company that also made Fight of Steel. That game has two mechanized versions of Jesus and Buddha from Fight of Gods, the pair renamed as Metal Messiah and Steel Nyorai. So yes, a game does have Mecha Jesus as a guest, finally. I got a feeling since they got so much attention for having Jesus in Fight of Gods, they could get some of that again here. Combate Monero is an indie fighter crossover of Mexican comic book characters. Two outsiders though are the guest Ariam and Evangeline, both of which are from indie card game Sompantali. If you own this card game on Steam, you gain access to Evangeline for free. That's a cool way to cross-promote. I wish the AAA fighters weren't so scared to do an idea like that, as this seems to be common in the indie fighter scene. There was another exchange of characters between Robo-O and Uchu Mega Fight. You had Robo-O getting Uchuzine and Shippo, whereas Uchu Mega Fight got Auto 5 and Max Zyber. Just kinda saying nonsense words at this point. Both having a chibi sprite art style I'm sure makes this crossover much easier, and maybe because of these guests, they're doing a full-on crossover game that's getting an official release later. Wrapping up with Fighting Vipers. This series was meant to appeal to the West since Virtua Fighter just wasn't catching on yet, but for whatever reason decided to have a guest character only for Japan. Pepsi Man was Japan's mascot for the soda brand, and he's essentially like a male Doral if they sold out. Like Doral, his moves are a mashup of the rest of the cast. There's even Pepsi advertising in some of the stages, so I suppose this was the next logical step. Perhaps Pepsi even paid Sega for his inclusion. Pepsi Man is only in the Japanese Saturn version and can be unlocked by randomly matching up with him and winning in the arcade mode. In the regular cast is a Japanese punk Lolita Candy. She's a Fighting Vipers mainstay and was snuck into Sonic the Fighters as a cat, but was never selectable without hacking the arcade board. It wasn't until specifically the Xbox 360 and PS3 re-release that she was a hidden selectable character and was curiously renamed Honey. Maybe they thought that fit more than Candy. She's a mashup of moves from different characters from the cast, which makes her more of a Doral archetype. Honey was even put into the Sonic comics, making her the only fighting Viper to escape obscurity. This is a full circle moment because what helped inspire Sonic the Fighters in the first place was the devs of Fighting Viper sneaking in a playable Sonic and Tails in the game's files. They could only be accessed through hacking and weren't meant for arcade players to ever be able to see. Inside trader Yuji Naka apparently saw these and then pushed for a Sonic fighting game. Lastly, we got a guest that's in a uniquely weird spot. Fighting Vipers 2 had a deal with the devs of Force 5 to have one of their characters in the Fighting Vipers sequel, that being the Luchador Del Sol. The issue with Del Sol in the game he came from is that Force 5 was cancelled due to Thomas Wave's arcade board not being financially successful. Since Del Sol's game was cancelled, his guest character status is kinda revoked. He came here to visit, but now he's just part of the cast. I'm curious if Sega has to ask anyone for special permission when re-releasing this game. Force 5 was reworked into a different fighter for the Naomi arcade board called Jingi Storm. Funnily enough, Del Sol didn't make it in this roster either. As is hopefully evident, what's considered a guest character can be heavily put into question. It starts to get to a point where you might even have to start debating if the game you're talking about is even considered a fighting game. Just to briefly recap, there's so many different types of guest characters. Some are in-universe guests like Sakura showing up in rival schools, which makes sense easily in both games' lore. That would also qualify as an intercompany guest since Capcom owns both Sakura and rival schools. However, you do have examples where these intercompany guests don't always make sense in the lore, like having a version of Mega Man who exists only through the internet in feudal Japan with demons and magic, or Iori from KOF in the Game Boy version of Fatal Fury, since Iori has never been established in that game's lore like Terry has been with KOF. A full-on crossover guest is when one company had to have discussions with another to allow for a character's inclusion, like Geese appearing in Tekken 7. There is also the retroactive guest, where a character who was fully owned by a company is no longer and requires special permission to use them again, like the Pachinko Gals in KOF 14. Celebrity guests are pretty straightforward. A real dude or the company that represents them had to have been asked to be in the game, such as Salvatore in Fatal Fury.
The special moves, of course, they are strong.
Let's look at some stats. What guest character appears in the most fighters? Now, as we've proven, Shovel Knight is in a lot of games, but he's only a playable guest in 3 fighters. That's if we count Brawlhalla, even though he's more of a skin. Brawlhalla is gonna fuck with a lot of these stats. Again, if we count Brawlhalla, Akuma has 4 guest appearances. He's tied with Terry, and he's not in Brawlhalla, so he arguably has one over Akuma. Ryu seems to have the most at 6. It depends on what you count though. Smash 3DS, Wii U, and Ultimate are all separate games, so there's 3 right there. However, some might just say that's 2 if they combine 3DS and Wii U as one game. He's also in Brawlhalla, so that's 1 if you count it as well. The American Dad webcomic and Power Rangers Battle for the Grid are the other 2. I know those aren't all the games we were expecting, and we have to make some caveats for all these characters. Nothing really profound to be taken from this, I just find it interesting since some of these stats are very different than what I would have assumed at face value. If I somehow forgot someone, please let me know, but before you do, pause for a moment and consider a few things. Is this a character in a crossover game, and is it just part of the crossover? An example being the car and other inanimate objects in Fighter's Mega Mix that are all owned by Sega in a crossover with Sega-owned IPs. Is this an anime or manga character that has been canonized as being in the same world as that anime? An example being Ariel from Dr. Slump in Dragon Ball, or Gundams that aren't in Seed in the Gundam Seed Fighter. Is the character's inclusion even official? Example being Mario in Dong Dong Never Dies, or Barney the Dinosaur in Xenophage Alien Bloodsport. If those count, then does taking a picture of a Scorpion toy and putting him in Photo Dojo count? Do all the Mugen fighters ever made count? No. What about unplayable guest bosses in Pocket Rumble or any other game? Lloyd from the Tales series in the non-fighting game spin-off Soul Calibur Legends count? Nope. Even if there's a fighting game mode, the game as a whole isn't a fighter. What about the Ox in Fighter's history? Data East made Karate Champ, which had you fight an Ox, but is this actually the same Ox? I don't know. I would concede that he's a reference at least. John from World Heroes in SNK Hellrins, or any other World Hero characters in Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. ADK was bought up by SNK around this time, so these guys aren't guests in SNK made games anymore. What about guest movesets like Bristol summoning SMT demons in Groove On Fight? Well, Bristol himself is from Groove On Fight, so where would he be guesting from? He summons demons with designs from the SMT series, but it's his moveset that's the guest, not him. So yeah, take all of that into consideration. If we're being honest, if I neglected to include a guest, it's definitely going to be from an indie game. If so, post about it below and I'd love to check it out. I love discovering new fighters, and there's so many gems in the indie scene I'd love to learn about. I do truly love guest characters. Well, most of the time.
They are strong, like me.
Crossover games are as infrequent as ever, and these guests are sometimes the most we can expect in terms of getting certain IPs together in one game. I get that not all guests are created equal, and they can sometimes be a blemish on an overall perfect roster. My opinion is that guests are gonna happen no matter what. They just have a history of selling well, and companies aren't just gonna turn that away for artistic integrity. I get folks wanting a game to remain pure and free of guests, but I think those days are over. Games I never thought would ever get guests like Street Fighter and Guilty Gear have finally opened those doors. And once those doors have been flung open, they can never be shut.